Oh, hey, everybody. What's going on? Welcome back to another episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. Just like the previous episode and just like the next episode is going to be, my suggestion to you, if you like coffee or if you want to just support an amazing organization that was founded by amazing people, go to blackriflecoffee.com. I generally start with what's coming across the rotating banner, and I'm still looking at their boot campaign, which is a mission to raise $1 million for a veteran organization. If you buy one case, you're going to get one at 50% off plus free shipping. Looks like they have a new coffee coming out, Midnight Rider, which I bet you is going to be on the ECS or exclusive executive coffee subscription, whatever the hell it stands for. And if you don't want to do that, you can start a normal traditional coffee subscription, if you will, getting whatever type of roast, ground, whole bean, whatever you want it to be, delivered to wherever you want, whenever you want to. And then again, this ridiculously dumb bass cat boat is still up there. Please, somebody just win the thing. They also have apparel, which is exactly what you think it is. Gear, as in things you can drink coffee out of. Bundles, meaning things you could make coffee with. Roasts, everything you could possibly want. blackriflecoffee.com. And that's it. My guest today is Jesse Gould, an Army veteran. Ranger specifically, deployed to Afghanistan 3 times, and then he founded Heroic Hearts Project in 2017 with the goal to spearhead the acceptance and use of ayahuasca therapy as a means of addressing the current mental health crisis among veterans. Psychedelic treatments for post-traumatic stress. Not something I have personal experience with, but something that many close friends of mine actually do. And instead of me talking about what Heroic Hearts does, I'm going to shut up and let Jesse talk about why he started the organization and what he's trying to do with it. Episode number 296 with Jesse Gould. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. Get cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
Mr. Gould, where would you like to begin?
Wherever your heart takes you. Can start from the beginning.
Little follow your heart action. I like that.
I like to freeform a little bit.
Well, you're living in New York now. What brought you there?
Yeah, so my wife actually. I started off in New York in terms of my career. Was working in finance there. Then more recently, I was living in Colombia, in Medellin. That kind of started this whole journey, was just traveling around South America.
Well, go back to the finance.
Yeah.
What kind of finance did you do?
Yeah, so before joining the military, I actually took a little bit of a alternative path. So graduated Cornell University economics, and then I was in investment banking for a pretty short period of time. So I had the fortune of graduating 08, 09, right at the...
Pull that mic a little closer to you.
Okay.
There you go.
Right at the heart of the financial collapse.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so leading up to it was a pretty interesting time to be in finance because, as what happens, everybody who was going in was making huge bonuses, and so engineers, mathematicians, finance people, all were going into Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. And so I remember doing interviews for internships, and it was just a room packed full of 300 people nervously awaiting their interview, trying to get that Goldman Sachs, because you would get...
I just imagine Wolf of Wall Street.
It was like similar vibes.
We'll take 2 martinis every 5 minutes until one of us passes the fuck out.
I can't imagine being an interviewer because you got like 15-minute interviews, and it was just throughout the day, hundreds of like nerdy kids just trying to make their mark in that time period.
What'd they ask you?
So there was always the notorious thing with like Goldman that they would just try to throw you through a loop. And so you're always trying to prepare, like, why is a sewer cover round? Or look around this room, how many ping pong balls could you fit into here? So they're trying to like see how you process things, how you reason things.
Okay.
Others were just kind of more straightforward of what are you studying? What do you want to do? All that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, I don't really know what they were looking for, but it was also, I mean, the guys that had uncles and fathers in the business tended to have a much better chance of landing those internships, as you would expect.
Funny how that works itself out. Okay. All right. What led you to pursuing finance?
I think it was just kind of the most open-ended. I liked investing before when I was in high school. Originally, I was actually considering a medical career, but then the consideration of doing 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 4 to 8 years of internship, and then if you get to that spot where you're like, oh shit, I don't really like this, you're kind of SOL. And so I still liked that, but I had a fortune of my high school, you could actually internship at hospitals. So in my sophomore, junior year, I was there in ER situations, watching over surgeries and doing drawing blood and all that kind of stuff, which was pretty cool for a high school kid. But more often than not, all the surgeons I talked to are like, hey, dude, if you want a family, this is not the career to go. And I was like, oh, not me. But I also had a family member who was a doctor, essentially, and he just kept saying, hey, go to business. So I kind of figured that the business would be a little bit more open trajectory and at least give me a baseline skill. Yeah. And then if I wanted to pursue that down the line, I could still kind of figure it out.
Had the market not crashed, do you think you would have enjoyed working in finance, or do you look back at it now? Are you glad that it actually changed your trajectory?
I think I would have made the same decision had it not. By that time, I was already relatively convinced that I wanted to join the military. It was also, even though it collapsed, I still had some job prospects. And that's actually, if you can make it, one of the better times to get in, because if you can land a job and get those connections early on, then once the market turns, you're already in a senior position, you're off to the races. So from that perspective, and it's like anything else in misery, you get the good connections. People get to see who you are. It's easy to do well, make money when everybody's doing that, but when people are literally jumping off, the second floor near the stock exchange because of everything burning up, it's a kind of different environment. And so you had kind of more stronger relationships, but Wall Street also really revealed itself because that was a situation completely brought on by greed, by people just trying
We're talking about the housing collapse, right?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck yes, it was.
It was the housing collapse, but then that expanded to everything else because then it was like the hedge funds and the banks doing, new financial instruments to take the most out of it and leveraging.
The Big Short.
Exactly. So everybody who doesn't understand that, the Big Short's actually a really good explanation of that. So for me, it was just kind of that spot where I was struggling to get in. Everybody was going in. There was sky-high bonuses and all that kind of stuff. And then getting an internship on Wall Street, investment banking, and then all that happened where Lehman ceased to exist, Bear Stearns ceased to exist. Kids I knew had internships there. Their parents thought they had retirements there. Then all of a sudden there's nothing. And so then there's just this flood of people who wanted to work on Wall Street, and capital wasn't moving at all. And it was just this sort of World War Z sort of mentality right there. And so it was a pretty interesting time to be there.
I have heard from people who are working in the financial world that, they have described it routinely as just Armageddon.
Yep.
Like trapdoor, things falling apart.
Well, because people didn't know where it was going to go either. And it was a global recession, right? And the thing that happened about it is, one, banks were imploding. Two, the Federal Reserve was taking over banks. So we really didn't know what was going to happen there, right? And then also capital just wasn't flowing. So it went from a pretty liquid market. And for what that means is that anybody trying to get an investment, there was just no investment being made unless there was absolute security, which there really isn't in that case. So nothing was selling. None of the private equity were getting funding for their companies. And so it's almost this stop in business, which then just makes everything worse. It's like trains buckling up. And so everybody's just kind of sitting on their hands. And at the same time, people were losing jobs. People were losing their pension funds. It was pretty, you could see the fear of God in a lot of people's eyes during that time.
But do you think they learned their lesson? Because at the end of The Big Short, and it is a fantastic movie. I am not going to say that I am financially literate in any shape or form, but it is broken down for an audience that would be appropriate for me. So I understood it. And of course, at the end of it, it's not really giving any way of, well, it's actually all historical. So you can either go watch it or read about it. But at the very end, it was the CDOs and like the synthetic CDOs and all this stuff. And they explained that in the movie. But it talks about how basically a few years after that, they had started that same process again, relabeled as something else.
Yeah. So I mean, the current. let's just freak out everybody in the audience right off.
Well,
the
we're
bat.
just so dumb.
Yeah.
People are so blinded by their own greed.
Well, it's also the question of where the criticism and where the voice comes from, right? Like if it was a common person, they'd be like, "Wait, whoa, hold on, let's not just. If we're going to bail this out, let's at least change some things."
Yeah, let's bail it out as a last resort and make hard-stopped changes so we can't find ourselves in this situation again. That would be reasonable, I think, to most people.
So to answer your question, no, nothing's changed. I mean, some things have changed, but not to the degree that you'd want it. So the one people are worried about right now is the commercial real estate market because of the whole COVID dynamic and the working at home and Zoom landscape and people moving away from cities like San Francisco and New York and all that, moving out here, as I'm sure you're aware.
Some people are. I actually
like
think
Bozeman and stuff like that.
To a degree, I think it's a little bit overblown, though.
Yep.
I hear and have heard, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people, and I can only speak for what I've heard here locally in Kalispell, Montana. It's maybe not necessarily indicative of the entire state, but there were a lot of people complaining about a few things. One, with the influx of out-of-state money, increasing the prices to a place where locals can no longer afford to live.
Right.
I think that's a real issue for sure. The politics is another portion of it, what people can complain about a lot. Well, it's all the people leaving California and they're coming here. And if they're leaving California because they don't like the politics of California, then maybe those are the people that you would want to move here. The people who love the politics of California probably are going to stay there.
Right.
So maybe there are people in L.A. or San Diego or San Francisco, the bastions of the very deep blue, that would want to go on a Mormon mission, for lack of a better analogy. Like, hey, we're going to Kalispell. We're going to convert everybody to the blue. We're going to turn red to blue. I don't see that happening. I see people leaving because they don't like the situation that they're in, and I don't think you need to worry too much about those people.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think there's a few factors going on. I think people are reconnecting with spots where they can be outdoors and recreation. You know, there's always migration shifts over the course of time. But I mean, regardless, in places like New York, there does seem to be there does seem to be trends that they're moving out of the city. But at the very least, too, more people are working at home. For instance, my wife, she works for a big international company. And they let the lease expire on their office, and now they have a floor on the WeWork, right? And that tends to be a pretty common trend. And so you're seeing that's potentially, I don't know if no financial issue looks like the previous financial issue. So I doubt it's going to be the same sort of thing, but there's a bulk of commercial real estate that's not even being used. People invest a lot of money in it. And
there's only a few potential suitors or candidates that could fill some of these buildings.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a mom and pop bakery, again, to use another shitty example, that's going to take an entire floor out in a New York City skyline.
Yep.
But from the same time, on the other side, if you have a remote workforce, I can see the capital requirement of the monthly, every month you're stroking a check for the cost of that building. You're going to recover a lot of capital by not doing that.
Absolutely. And they've shown so far, at least early on, that productivity has not necessarily gone down when it's this combination of work at home and have some sort of office scape. It's not like people were, maybe they can take the naps, but that's not necessarily counter to it. They can.
I think it depends on the person.
I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on the industry and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've read some articles recently. Actually, I think I read one about Elon Musk. I think Twitter might have I don't know if they moved out of their building, but I swear I saw in an article that they stopped paying.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw that. But Musk, on the other side, is also one of those people of, like, get back to work, lazy people.
Yeah.
But he's also notorious for, like, sleeping under his desk and not going home.
Like 48% sure he's an alien, but like I've said many times, I'm kind of here for that. So even though you were eyeballing a career on Wall Street, you're living in New York, where did the idea of service come from, and what branch were you looking at?
Yeah, so this was starting to, I think, form during a little bit in high school and definitely in college, and it was just always this, it was more of a feeling. It was hard to explain that at the time. It was just, I always appreciated the military. I was intrigued by the challenge. Growing up, I always appreciated, I heard about back in the World War II, the Hollywood stars that would join the military when they were risking their career. Like, that always inspired me in a lot of ways. The people, just in general, giving away something for the sake of a bigger picture, right? People that have
service of a greater good, if you will.
Service of a greater good, if you want to use a better way of putting it.
It's a bumper sticker I saw somewhere. It might have been on Michael's car.
Yeah, so I mean, that always intrigued me, and I think just like I said, that physical challenge, that American dynamic, and I felt very fortunate of going to a great university, coming from middle class family and having so much potential there, and I wanted to give back to the system, the American system that allowed me to be there, and so that was just one of those things that was always on my mind. And then I just got to this point in college where I think I was also expecting maybe a little bit more romantic, where I'd come out and I'd be this philosophical man, or at least have some sort of, shift in who I was. But instead it was high school 2.0, and I was still... Many
leather-bound books and a scarf and an ivory-handled pipe.
If I even got that, then I would have been happy. But I graduated... And I looked around, I was like, I'm still surrounded by the same dopey kids I was 4 years ago, and I didn't...
Well, they all came with you. You just go dopey kids in high school to dopey kids in college, and you pay more for it.
And then dopey kids to basic training.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just felt, I think it was just what I've translated it now, like looking back. I'm big on the side that we do need these coming of age, becoming a man ceremonies. There's all these tribes, histories, dynamics where that was always part of culture, where you are a kid and now we're going to do this big ceremony with everybody involved, and this is signaling to you that things have changed, right? You need to be mature. Generally there's some sort of physical challenge around it, some sort of spirit walk, what have you. And for whatever reason, I think I just had that missing piece that my intuition was pointing me to, like, there's something I need, there's something I'm not understanding about myself or not connecting to myself. And
intuitively you felt that way, like you were having those conversations with yourself?
I was just having the feeling of something's missing.
Could you describe it at the time? Because obviously now we're talking years down the road.
Yeah.
At the time, were you able to describe what that was, or it was just a feeling that you had?
No, which probably led in large part why my family was like, what the hell are you doing? Are you crazy? Because I was like, hey, Mom, I have this feeling that I should join the military. I know I'm working in Wall Street right now. It was, and anytime I just try to describe it, it was kind of more of this amorphous web where there was patriotism, there was giving back, there was all this kind of stuff. And anybody I just talked to, their eyes would glaze over like, what the hell are you talking about, man? So it's more of a gut feeling at that point of like, this, for whatever reason, I'm being drawn to this career path or this change in career path. I'm not going to be very good at explaining it to you, but this is something I think I have to do.
To me, what you're describing makes a lot of sense. I remember the conversation my dad was having about his time in Vietnam, and that was the first time I'd ever heard the word SEAL, which was intriguing at the time, but I didn't know shit.
Yeah.
But when I did find out about it, it became like this insatiable desire, like this magnetizing force that I couldn't escape. But what you're describing is, I've been thinking a lot about this recently, is it's almost like this awakening moment that I think people have to have. And I think it's the shift in their life. It's the shift where you stop feeling like the world is just happening to you.
Yep.
And you go to this place where you realize, like, I have to take control of my own fate. I have to take responsibility for my actions. And I was actually thinking about it. The biggest awakening for me, all I'd ever wanted to do in life was be a SEAL.
Yeah.
And
At what age?
11.
Okay. Just from your dad talking about it, or
My dad he was not a SEAL. He worked on the Mark I patrol boats in Vietnam. So the first, like, I wonder what term they would use. Squadron, I think, probably, of jacuzzi jet powered, propulsion, which not highly tested. Fortunately, in the waterways of Vietnam, there's not a lot of limbs and leaves and detritus, so they would never clog up in moments that you would not want them to. But he had talked about SEALs. But 6 weeks after years of literal blood, sweat, and tears, not a lot of blood, mostly sweat and tears. Probably stubbed my toe a few times, but I go through all the training. I do my probationary period at the SEAL team. I take my Trident Review Board test, and I pass it. And about 6 weeks later, I'm standing in front of my commanding officer's desk, potentially losing it all. And it would be easier to say that moment in time, like standing at that desk, was like this light bulb that went off for me. Mm-hmm. But the light bulb actually went off about a week before that, when I started going through the Chiefs Review Board and then the Executive Officers Review Board. And I won't get into the story because it's fucking stupid. And it's easy to view the story as a series of bad decisions, which all of them were, by the way. But the biggest problem for me, and the reason I call it an awakening, is that the biggest issue that I was having at that time was how I viewed myself.
Right.
I just was young and I'm bulletproof. I'm like, I'm a Navy SEAL. I can do whatever I want to do. And I let other people take ownership of my actions because I was surrounded by the people that I'd always wanted to be surrounded by. I was like surrounded by essentially with my heroes. I was serving in I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I'm here. If they would have been like, hey, Andy, go get the M60. I'd be like, okay, this is awesome. What are we doing? We're going to rob a bank. Like, okay, this is definitely illegal, but you're my hero, and I'm going to go do it. That headspace, me viewing myself in that way and giving people that level of authority over me was completely wrong. So I get into this incident. I did have the best of intentions at the time, but there was a short period of time between when I got back to San Diego and when they started the review process. And I'll tell you what, your in-the-moment actions seem way cooler than when they ask you to pull out a dry erase marker on a whiteboard in front of like 8 of the most senior enlisted personnel, and they're like, go ahead and explain to us what you did.
Yeah.
Fuck. I'm an idiot. Before I went into that meeting, though, because that's how it started. It was the Chiefs Review Board for a couple of us, and then a few select got to continue on to Executive Officers Mast, followed by Captain's Mast. Before I went into that Chiefs Board meeting, I had what I would describe as my own personal awakening, and it was just the realization of, you know what? Like, I'm an idiot. I let everything get out of control, and I excused it away to myself. I allowed this shit to... I knew what they were doing was wrong. I didn't say shit because they were my heroes.
Yeah.
And never again am I going to let that shit happen. So when I actually went into the Chiefs Review Board and the Exos Mast and the CO's Mast, I was very honest about what I did. And I just was like, this is completely my fault. This was my choice. I am ashamed and embarrassed of how I represented the SEAL community. And at the end of the day, I actually think that's why I survived, because that could have been the end of my career. And the CO that was wearing a camouflage uniform at the time, this motherfucker, his last name was Morgan, and he was a captain. Fucking Captain Morgan. I'm standing at Captain Morgan's desk, and he slides a pair of scissors across. And he goes, I'm not going to take your trident from you, but you're not going to wear it for 6 months. So I had to cut off, in his office, the trident patch that I had, the only thing I had ever wanted in my life, and then walk around with the fucking little imprint that clearly showed this. It's like a rectangle that only that occupied. And like, son of a bitch. But that might have been the most formative time period in my life because it changed how I think about myself. And I don't think a lot of young men and women are having that awakening moment. I actually think, and I don't know if it's intentional, I don't know if it's malicious, I don't know if it's incompetent. I actually think they're being coached away from that and being told that nothing is their responsibility. Nothing is their fault. Don't even look in the mirror. Just look externally. It gives me great cause for concern, and I don't know how we fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. There's actually a famous story of second bat rangers robbing a bank, and they all got caught, but they said it was the most tactically sound.
Yeah,
bank
one of
robbery.
their buddies, Jericho Denman, has been on the podcast. We did the jump expedition with him.
Yeah.
He told that story. Apparently, he got a knock on the door as well, too, because he knew them well enough that, like, perhaps we should talk to this individual.
Yeah, I know Jericho.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I could fuck a bank up. I could teach Michael how to fuck a bank. Like, you and I, but it's not hard.
Yeah, if you have the...
Two guys in it. I would take an M60 over the new stuff. It's like, no, I just prefer it.
Yeah.
But I digress. Sorry, I completely hijacked.
No, not at all. I mean, it's funny you brought that because I had I think awakening before that, which, you know, it's all a series of events that creates who you are, and it's always hard to pinpoint where it starts, where it begins, where it ends.
Unless you're standing at captain's mast.
Exactly.
There's a couple there that burn a little bit brighter. They help illuminate the cave.
Exactly. I have a few of those misery moments. I studied during college. I studied abroad in Ecuador, and that was kind of my first sort of like. I traveled a little bit, but that was my first real exposure into that. And I just noticed, you know, before that I was just academically focused, and this was really the first deep immersion in that. And just being insecure about speaking the language and approaching people. And it became more and more apparent of all these fears that were just coming up. And that was sort of my awakening moment through this, of just really self-analyzing of like, why are you being led by fear? Like, why is this such a prominent dynamic? And it was also that highlight of kind of similar to what you're talking about, whether you choose a challenge or the challenge chooses you, of not being in the comfortable situation. Yeah. Like, I could have easily ridden out my time in college, got my degree, but it was just like, okay, this, like, I know how this game works. Let me try something else. And putting myself in this completely new environment, having to figure it out, having to learn this new landscape, this new culture. And that's that dynamic too with the military is, and what I think a lot of people, a lot of children are missing nowadays is that challenge of being confronted, being slapped in the face when they make stupid decisions. There's just not the same repercussions. It's sort of, you know, like the nerfed game kind of thing.
Well, until you have that awakening, I don't. It's like you can't continue your life as an adult. You know, I mean, I guess you could get to being an adult depending on what age you categorize it at, but it's not the way that I would want people to go through life, I guess is the kindest way to say it. But it certainly seems like that moment or that awakening for people is farther and farther down the road, if at all. And I don't think it benefits anybody, to include the individual.
I agree. I mean, and I think that comes back to that coming of age. There's a reason, if you look back in history, there's always this sort of thing. Most ceremonies nowadays have become sort of superficial. We do it because we've always done it, you know, but back in the day, or back in, I guess, more tribal cultures, a lot of these ceremonies had pretty significant meaning, right? There was these... They
also didn't involve everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of ceremonies, or whatever type of reward that people are after, for the desire of inclusivity and not hurting people's feelings, they involve everybody as broadly as possible, which, in my opinion, largely and often degrades the value of whatever it is that the ceremony is supposed to provide.
Right.
So, I mean, it has to. You got to work for it. It has to mean something. If everything means everything, then nothing means anything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think that's kind of I sort of view it as, especially in like the boomer era, it was always this sort of mentality that you come and you work your ass off so your kids live a better life, right? And we felt that if we educate people more, they had more access to information, we give them a better life, then it's just sort of everything's just going to get better. We're going to be a super smart, super comfortable, like great acting. But what we're seeing is that's not actually the case. The more we do that, the more we're actually going away from what is actually important, sort of the basic kind of things. And I do think, I mean, there's always struggle when there's transitions. I do think some people are realizing that and trying to return to kind of more simplistic dynamics of that, trying to bring their kids to where it's not super easy and protected. But that's been a trend for such a long time because now, hey, you did it. Previous generations did that, but now it's not serving generations, and then there's going to be they might not be prepared. But again, I think there's going to be friction, but I think it'll go back and forth. It'll resolve itself. It's just always a question of how messy it is.
It's true. So when you were looking at the military, how'd you pick which branch?
So I was kind of starting to make that final decision. Told my family that I had this great feeling, and I couldn't really explain it to them. Which I think it was on like New Year's, and I remember the moment. My dad was like more about it because he had kind of more of the like he never went to Vietnam. Was glad he didn't, but also felt bad he didn't go.
Yep.
My mom and my grandma it was like New Year's. We all got like a Blockbuster video, and it was like, hey, before we start the video, I have an announcement to make, and obviously ruined the night. So then I was like figuring out what I wanted to do. So I knew for a fact that I wanted to do special operations because if I was going to do this kind of dramatic left turn, I wanted to be the best trained, and I wanted to be surrounded by the best trained. I did some like high school athletics, but I'd never consider myself anywhere close to an athlete or anything like that. So
Same here. Solidly average.
Yeah.
Probably a little below.
I was definitely on the below scale.
I was on the team, but not the highlight reel, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. When I told people I was planning this, they kind of gave me that, like, are you sure you think you can do that? So I started training, started making it, and this was like 08, 09, so there wasn't the same you had to go on like web forums of like, what does it mean to be this? And it was all this crazy stuff of like, oh, you have to do 1,000 push-ups in a week's time or in a day's time. So you kind of had to like read between the lines of what sort of physicality you need to be. I was, one of the dumb kids and like first intrigued by the Marines, like that spirit de corps and
they have that for sure, man.
Yeah.
I think more than any other branch, I could never knock the Marine Corps on their sense of, God, what would be the word? Esprit de corps, I mean, actually encapsulates it, but just loyalty to the Marine Corps.
Before and afterwards, you still meet Marines today, and like I love it. I think the thing that took me away from that is watching. I don't know if you ever saw that show, Generation Kill.
No.
So pretty decent, pretty accurate view of the military as a recon platoon, and they're being used for the initial invasion of Iraq. And it really just goes into like, hey, you guys are going into Iraq, but we're not giving you gun oil. And you have the old like leftover M4s from the Army.
Fuck yeah.
And so again, I was intrigued with that, but it was also it kind of crossed that line of like, if I'm going to do this, I at least want a working weapon, Yeah,
you flipped over to the calendar and you realized it was past the year 2000.
Yeah.
So maybe I could take a weapon that was designed in the same decade.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
That function, that had oil and bullets possibly.
And maybe something other than iron sights. No, but I mean, if you're into that type of thing.
If you're into that.
They work without, but goddamn, they work better with.
Don't tell any of the old guard that. They'll be like, goddamn kids with their sights.
But let's go side-by-side comparison with one of the old guards. They can have their most tricked out, whatever, their M1 Garand if they wanted. I bet you if I threw even just a fucking aim point on an M1 Garand, they'd be like, this is sweet.
Yeah. they
would
say
like
that
it.
For the moment, and then when they were back
100%.
at the bar, they'd be like, oh, that was...
Yeah, fuck those guys. They don't even know. It's like, yeah, we don't, but we also have cooler shit, so get on board.
I don't know why I didn't go the Navy SEAL route. I think it was more like...
Intelligence, probably.
Intelligence, but it was also just never... Doing that suffering in water just never appealed to me. If
you don't have a lot of exposure to water, it's probably a good career path to avoid.
Yeah, it wasn't a super comfort zone, So then it kind of leaned to Army, and so that was between Special Forces and Ranger, and I was pretty open in between, and it just kind of happened to be just in terms of my eyesight, oddly enough, wasn't horrible, but it was like 10 points off that I couldn't do SF, but I could do Ranger.
Interesting.
So I went into like I was planning on one of those, right? And so went in, did the whole like MEPS and processing, all that kind of stuff, and was dead set on that. Fortunately, because and I was enlisting too.
I was just going to ask you, did you ever have thoughts of going in as an officer, given your college education?
No, that never appealed to me. It was one of those things of like, if I'm going to do this, I just want to do it from the ground up and just give it the full thing. Yeah. And it was also just that dynamic of I didn't think an economics degree qualified me to lead, dangerous people overseas. It just didn't really like, hey, I'm Jesse, I have this degree, follow me. I wanted to learn that whole dynamic of start at the bottom with everybody, and then it was also the quickest way to get into Ranger or SF and possibly deploy. And so just kind of cutting out the red tape and just going that way. But that also gave me a little bit more leverage when negotiating at the in-processing, the MEPS. And so at first they tried to put me into EOD. And they're like, oh, hey, they did the whole like car salesman. We don't have anything, but, we do have this EOD option for you. And I already put out on a limb that I was joining the military. I didn't want to go tell my mom afterwards that I was going to be disarming bombs.
Yeah, IEDs. Hey, Mom, so here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to crawl up on these IEDs. First, maybe locate them, hopefully with a metal detector first. Maybe my feet, though. You never know. And, try to take apart an armed IED.
Yeah, and that country that's always in the news for people getting exploded? And I think it was right around the time that Hurt Locker came out, too. So it wasn't good PR for EOD techs. And so I was like, hey, guys, if you can't give me I don't know how it works with SEAL, but you can get like it in your contract that at least you get the option to try out for it.
I don't know, actually, in the modern day.
So, like, if you go in the Army, sometimes they give you contracts there, but it's the means of the Army. So if you go in and somebody's like you, could easily end up in Korea or Louisiana or what have you. And so I wanted to make sure at least I had the chance of going through selection. And so I was like, hey, I'll walk away if you guys don't get me. And they're like, okay, wait 1 second. Magically, they got the phone call, and there happened to be a Ranger contract that opened up. So nervously signed on the dotted line, and within about a month was heading to intake, basic training.
How'd that go for you?
Basic was honestly a disappointment. It was actually kind of terrifying in a lot of ways. It was also the time when it was like... It was during the surges, too, so It was like, oh, we have really strict requirements, but somehow people still passed, even the people that can pass a PT test, the people that were actually discharging at a very unusual rate.
Let's just call it a buffet line of individuals.
Yeah.
It hits the bell curve and often the far left and right extreme of that bell curve.
I mean, especially the Army, too. I mean, just in terms of the size of the Army, you get
Navy's the same way.
Yeah.
I came in pre-9/11. The environment that I grew up in, I would describe as it was awesome. I was loved by both of my parents. The construction site that I worked on with my father probably equaled the difficulty of Navy boot camp. And I am not trying to speak negatively about the Navy's experience in boot camp, but as far as like the hardest thing you're ever going to do in life, set the bar higher. If you've gone through that. There were people who were crying themselves to sleep. There were people who legitimately were pissing the bed so they could leave boot camp. It's like, whoa, what did you think you were signing up for?
Yeah. I mean, I remember at the beginning of basic, they do the thing called shark attack, right? You're like loaded up on the bus. They drive around in circles, so it seems like you're there for a while. And then they release you out, and then it's just like...
We didn't have that experience.
Okay. So they do that. It's kind of like selection where they're just yelling at you. You have to pack your bags, you run up a hill. And I remember very distinctly, and you're like falling off the bus because you have all your bags and all that kind of stuff. And I remember one kid just yelling, like, I don't know why I'm here. While everybody's like, you signed up for this, dude. I don't know what you thought this was going to be.
Good God.
And there's so many people that didn't do like an ounce of research. It was just pretty shocking that I guess they just saw the right commercial and, saw the cool uniforms. So that whole process, and I actually think I got out of shape during that time because they're just putting you through this stuff. It was during winter, and so you're just getting sick constantly, and also at that time, this is like one of the Army's dirty little secrets that I wasn't able to find out and research. they signed me up as an 11X, which 11 Bravo is the basic infantry guy, which you expect going to Ranger, that's what you do. So they say 11X, and they're like, oh, this is a placeholder. It's all good. You'll be 11 Bravo once you get past basic training. When I was going through the in-processing, they literally just put us all in this room, and like, this half you're 11X, this half you're 11 Charlie. So 11 Charlie is Mortarman. And the reason they do that, in my estimation, they might have a different explanation, but any MOS that doesn't get a lot of people, they have to pay bonuses for, right? And most people don't sign up to be Mortarman, because if they want to do infantry, they're just going to, go do that. And so all of a sudden, without choice, I was a Mortarman, and everybody in that side of the room was, what does that mean? What am I going to do, And to the point where when I got to my unit in Ranger, none of the people in my platoon had signed up to be a mortar.
That checks out.
Yeah. And so that was the last little slight the Army, well, I mean, long series, but that was the biggest one. So I went through that, did the whole mortar training. Because I had the contract, it was immediate to airborne, which is another kind of like just injure you before you actually do real stuff and doesn't train you that much. And then go through selection. So the lead up through selection, I got unlucky with the timing. So it was like best ranger competition. So they break sort of the selection process. And so we're in like a holdover for a month and a half, 2 months. And so as all the RIs that were on recovery for injury or because they had, seen too much stuff and kind of needed to chill a little bit. And so they were pretty much like the prison wardens in charge of us, like starry-eyed kids ready to go. And we're in like the barracks that they're about to tear down because it had like asbestos, and just being there before. And this is all before even getting into selection, right? And you didn't have control over your exercise regime. You didn't have control whether you were able to do the laundry at the end of the week. That was possibly the most miserable time that I had been in the military, because it was just, your life was completely out of your control. You didn't even have the chance to prove yourself, and you're just at the behest of these people that just had that kind of masochistic sense a little bit, because they're angry in themselves. It's not like they're bad people, but just that given situation where they didn't want to be there, we didn't want to be there, and we were able to go and do all that kind of stuff. So that was probably one of the worst spots I'd been.
In an average 24-hour period during that time, how much of it would you spend considering your poor life choices and decision that you had made to join the Army?
I was still pretty set. I think it was more the looming fear of the unknown selection, because also in that you'd have two groups. So one we called worldwide, and one that were like on the cusp of going. So the worldwide were all the people that failed it, right? And so again, in this sort of prison,
we're talking about Ranger selection, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So so before it was called RIT, Ranger Indoctrination Program. I was in one of the first Ranger Assessment and Selection
RASP.
Program. RASP, yeah. So the worldwide too, for whatever reason, these people they failed. They're supposed to be sent out to the rest of the Army. The people in charge of it would lose their order. So there had been people in this worldwide holdover for like 1.5, 2 years.
Shut up. What were they doing during that time?
They were just getting fucked with. They would just we'd have to pick weeds, to the point of somebody had connections. They complained to their congressman, and then all of a sudden all these people got orders. But it was that sort of miserable dynamic to be in. And then you have, obviously they failed it, and so they're going to build up the stories of oh, it's impossible. So you're just kind of in this limbo purgatory spot, and that's on your mind. Not even your bad decisions are on your mind. It's just surviving and, cursing God at that point.
Yeah. That's a long time to fail a selection course and hang out in this unknown area.
And so, not having a purpose, right? You signed up for this, and your life, and you at least trained for something,
It sounds like it's just a recipe for having disciplinary problems.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Or, later down the line trauma problems.
Yeah. Fuck, okay. So eventually you started RASP, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I went through RASP. I'm sure you heard the stories, kind of normal challenge and same selection, different different people, all that kind of stuff. So able to get through that. Got stationed at 1st Battalion in Savannah, Georgia. And then it starts from ground zero. So you have the whole, like, hey, I did it. And then now you're bottom of the rung again.
Yeah. So what year did you land at 1st Battalion?
I landed 1st Battalion 2010, October. And it was pretty significant because the day I arrived, and I arrived in mortar platoon there, so a lot of the guys were still deployed. They're just getting done with their deployment. So they're starting to come back. But one of the most, like, noted, respected senior ranger mortarman had just been KIA'd from a mortar battle, essentially, over there. So the moment I was, like, diving into this was just this, very somber and real, like, oh, shit, this is real, to where within a week was going to Sergeant Vogler's funeral, meeting his family, and meeting some of the platoon at the first time. So it was pretty surreal time to get in there. But also, I mean, signified to me of this is what you signed up for. You better, like, get your shit in order. Like, this is real now.
I mean, that's a full benefit intro for sure.
Yeah, and just how, like, from that side of how his death really affected the platoon. In obviously a bad way, because he was such a respected and trusted leader. Like, there's a lot of guys who were full on ready to re-enlist had he still been around.
Yeah.
And so just also seeing the love of him and what it meant, because I had my whole fair share of good and bad leaders. Unfortunately, I think a little bit more on the bad leaders, but I did have the inspirational ones, and just always hearing the stories of Sergeant First Class Vogler made me have that, like, kind of inspiration of, like, hey, this is possible.
Yeah.
No, this is not a machine for just bad leaders.
Those larger than life characters are real. There's a couple people that stick out in my mind from my career as well, and it's man, the impact they would have on everybody around them. I mean, like, instant morale boost. Just their the persona and their character that they were. It helped around the edges, for sure.
But then it creates a power vacuum when they're gone.
It also really can impact people's confidence when they're either hurt or killed.
Yep.
I don't know if it's intentional. I never tried to lie to myself or say, like, oh, it could never happen to me, even though I think we kind of naturally in your head, like, oh, that sucks, but it could never happen to me. I don't think I ever verbalized it, but I probably thought it. Yeah, it's a tough mirror of mortality when that happens, for sure. Sitting at those funerals, there are some deep and probing questions that I had for myself.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big time for self-reflection, and I mean, just you're also seeing the impact on the family, which generally you're a little bit you just see the guys you're working with at that point. So just seeing the full spectrum and ripples of what this job entails was pretty interesting. Yeah. And then also tailored to the fact that I was, like, brand new and kind of in that, you're always messed up until you're not, or maybe you're always just messed up. So I was kind of in that, like, scramble mode of what I was doing, and I met my first team leader who was, at that point I was like 21, 22, had a little bit of professional experience. My first team leader was, kind of a smaller guy with a little bit of a Napoleon complex, and just instantly hating me. And I was like, okay, well, I have to eat crow. This is what I signed up for.
Were you around, or did the battalion have anybody who had been serving in that capacity since 9/11?
You mean in terms of, like, had been in Ranger from that time?
Yeah, and I asked that question because I'm curious, by 2010, Iraq was winding down, to say the least. Afghanistan was taking a different kinetic turn, I would say.
Yep.
And I'm just curious if there were people in the community who had experienced both the on-ramp, or not on-ramp, but the uptick, peak, and then downtick. I'm curious how they spoke about it to the newer people.
Yeah, we definitely had some of those people to various degrees. I mean, it all depend on your exposure to them too. Just because coming in essentially as a private, you're not going to have necessarily long conversations with the first sergeant
Yeah.
And there's always the like, no matter what generation you come in. Back when in my day it was tough, and you guys don't know, so we kind of. I don't know. I think Ranger is always that of like it was always tougher a few years ago kind of thing.
I think that's probably true military wide, but like it's a different conversation. I mean, the era and generation of instructors that put me through saw metal combat. They would have a really hard time arguing that it was tougher during their time.
I mean, the stories I always got like pre 9/11 Ranger. It was tougher in the unit just because they're peacetime and they're aboard. So then as like a private, so that's always what we got of like, oh, you guys have it easy. I had to crawl out my window so my team leader didn't see me, or we would be doing 10-mile laps with the boat over our head kind of thing.
Yeah. Were the people that were there for that time period, would you describe them looking back now, were they jaded at all by their experience?
I think they're jaded. I mean, the thing I kind of noticed, too, is the longer... I mean, by that time, too, it had been 10 years of constant deployment.
Sustained combat operations, for sure.
Yeah, and so it's with Ranger, it's 3 battalions, and so it's just this constant cycle. And, I mean, as with any special operations, I feel like the longer people get in, it's almost like they turn bipolar in a sense, where they can be, like, happy talking like we are right now, and then... you say something wrong, and then it's all of a sudden like kill mode, like in an instant. And what I saw is like the people that were longer in, it was just really, because it's 6 months training cycle, 6 months deployment, and it was just really that sort of. There's some that could break that mold. There's some that could be good mentors and that, but it really was just a jaded, I think, somewhat like physically exhausted. Crew like that were still performing at maximum capacity, but you could tell it was wearing on mind, body, soul.
For sure.
By that time, and like especially you get up to the first sergeant or some staff sergeants, and their bodies were already like pretty impacted by it. They're still be the last ones to tap out, but you could sense the heaviness, and there wasn't a lot of time to stop and do anything else but just train the guys immediately. And so I don't, beyond like a few moments, there wasn't really a lot of mentorship. It was, you have this expectation, if you don't meet it, you're going to get fucked up.
Yeah. How long did you stay in the Rangers?
I was only in total 4.5 years. It was, again, sort of the universe kind of aligned. After that power vacuum, we had a series of, especially like mortars and Ranger, it was really the redheaded kind of stepchild. Nobody really knew what to do with us, and everybody kind of hated us, but we're also the utility tool, so we were just carrying everything, You're
just a lemming.
And so, like, because we would still have to train on, like, line guy stuff, so we would attach to the line guy platoons. When we couldn't do mortar stuff, then we go and do, like, room clearing and the normal, like, Bravo stuff. But then we wouldn't have the same sort of set focus on them, so we'd always kind of be like the awkward like cousin, following them around kind of thing. But I mean, we still trained our asses off, and I think we accomplished it. But it's that kind of like you're not part of our group kind of dynamic. But then also just leadership was very eat its own. If they're miserable, they're going to make everybody under them miserable. So we had this in my unit, this big series of DUIs. Drug use to the point where like some weeks we're being tested like every week, and people are still pissing hot.
What was their drug of choice?
I think just like cocaine and MDMA were kind of the things.
Classic pairing, really.
Yeah, exactly. But people would just work hard, play hard. They would go. We were stationed in Savannah too, which didn't really help in the party mentality, and you're just getting exhausted from the training cycle and just go there and drink your life away. But because of that, a lot of people got kicked out, and so I ranked up duty position pretty quickly to where 2 years in, coming from the bottom, I was in charge of 30 or so people. I got the call when I was overseas in Afghanistan that all of a sudden I was a mortar section leader, and so I was in charge of all these mortars across Afghanistan as well as back home. and which is a big jump. It's normally an E6, E7 position, which would have normally taken like 8-9 years to get to. And there I was pretty cherry, like trying to figure it out to the degree that nobody trained me in how to do that, how to do NCOERs or anything like that. So I was just on our like web late at night in Afghanistan trying to figure out what the hell to do, and just being thrown into that. So by the time the wars were winding down and we're coming into peacetime with Afghanistan at the end of it, and I don't know in SEAL, but like things started to get really stupid the moment like peacetime started coming, and people were just trying to figure out what to do, and it was just, okay, let's make the training cycle more miserable as opposed to giving people rest. So again, the universe kind of aligned where I got to this duty position where there wasn't a lot of upward mobility. The wars were dying down, and I didn't really want to be sort of a peacetime ranger at that point. Had already done a few deployments, and it was just still that I just seen a few things of people were not protecting their own, some good things, some bad things, and it just kind of seemed time of, okay, let's see what the next chapter is.
How were your deployments? Were they what you thought they were going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to say. I mean, it's the hard thing to, I think, contemplate in the military is it's just a lot, like most of the time it goes by the book, right? It's kind of boring, and the hardest part is just to stay diligent. The hardest part is to go on mission and then still expect the worst to happen. Mine were pretty routine. There's some stuff pop up, but it really wasn't like, it wasn't anything that in itself was super traumatic. It was kind of the pretty standard go in, try to find the bad guys. Sometimes there's things that popped off, but never like super long engagements. Had, while I was there, some people, KIA. But again, it was never these big, Hollywood-esque kind of battles that there were those going on, but I seemed to, avoid them somehow.
Yeah. What was it for you that finally got you over the edge of deciding to get out?
I was thinking about it, and and this is after like I had been doing a duty position that I wasn't being paid for, and I think doing a pretty good job of it, and just spending extra time making sure my team was good, and going, in my opinion, above and beyond, and providing those under me things that I didn't have. And then I was like talking to the first sergeant and telling him I was considering this and that. And then he just came up and was like, "Oh, well, thanks for playing Army." And I was like, "Okay, that's all I need to hear."
Yeah.
Just complete lack of respect and for that kind of stuff. And there's just all these other controversies of higher leadership throwing other people under the bus, and just that view of when it came into peacetime, I just felt that dog-eat-dog mentality was just going to get worse before it got better.
I feel like, so I can speak a little bit to the pre-9/11 SEAL community, and it was, from a structural perspective, it was not set up for success. Looking in the rearview mirror, obviously with the hindsight, each team had a geographic specialty.
Yep.
So they did like their own little training. They could have their own like micro-specific gear and uniforms and all this shit. And then we get thrown into a melting pot together where we're working for Army generals that have no idea what the difference between SEAL Team 1 and 3 and 5 are. They're like, yeah, just go do SEAL shit together.
Yep.
And you get them all in a room and everybody's like, what's that? How do you guys do this? What's that mean over there? It was an absolute train wreck. But pre-9/11, absent an enemy, you have to battle for relevance, because relevance is directly proportional to your budget.
Right.
So, no external enemy, let's create internal enemies. And we would fight amongst ourselves. And I mean that more like at a bureaucratic level, and I guess a little bit. It was probably, I think, more good-natured at like the boots on the ground level. But I think the return to that, especially in a like post-9/11 world where, we used to call it the golden Connex box. Pre-9/11, it's like, okay, yeah, if the big mish goes down, the golden Connex box is going to come out, and everything you've ever wanted and everything you could ever need is going to come out of it. And all that comes at a cost, which I didn't realize at the time is tied to a budget line item and all of the things that go into making all this stuff possible. Well, when you don't have a job to do anymore, but you really want to keep that budget, it gets a little spicy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you start looking around like your friend group or your the communal group of people who are all wearing the same uniform. Like, well, how do I separate my unit from these so I can keep my budget? Yeah, it gets a little wild.
Yeah, it gets wild, and I think it was the same sort of reason of, everybody's already exhausted that, like, the 6 months on, 6 months, and, the training cycles are probably more exhausting than the deployments, so at least you get a little bit more downtime then. And then when they're, like, talking about, oh, we only have these task force training, let's do 2 more. And everybody's just like, let's maybe a pause, maybe let people recuperate and not just lose their families and lose their sanity.
Why do you think that externally, I've seen this so many times, both individuals and at organizational levels, they think that the military has leadership dialed, and they want to bring military influence into their organizations. And I have landed firmly now on that's a catastrophically bad idea.
I'm kind of of mixed opinions, though, because I have...
It depends on the leader.
It depends on the leader, but I do see at least... I mean, this is not across the board, but I do see military people tend to be more direct in taking action. I've been in a lot of corporate situations where people know they need to do something, but nobody, even if it's not necessarily the right direction at first, nobody's willing to be like, hey, put their neck out there and start making it happen. Where
is that because they're afraid if they put their neck out, it might get cut off?
Maybe, but I think they're just not used to it. I think it's that in the military sense, especially with privates, you tell them to do something and they can ask you all these questions, or they can figure out how to do it themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that sort of self-selection of like, okay, I don't necessarily know how to do this. I'm going to talk to the right people, and then okay, if nobody's making decisions, somebody needs to make a decision. At least that's kind of my experience. It's not universal, right? There's going to be a lot of people that just kind of have that, like, I'm a leader and say they're a leader but not actually do leadership dynamics. I've come across a lot of that.
Well, and maybe I'm incorrect in the way that I'm viewing it or what I have seen, but it seems like people think that the military leadership is kind of a hammer nail philosophy, and it's a dangerous one. And the reason I say that is, we can treat people in the military in a way that would never pass in a civilian organization because they're contractually fucking obligated to stay there.
Yep.
Like, oh, you don't want to leave the military? Cool, go AWOL. Have fun with a capital F on your record. And don't worry, the dishonorable discharge doesn't change anything about your employment ability for the next 10 years of your life. The military model, I think, masks poor leadership because there's no off-ramp for the people who are on the receiving end of that poor leadership. It can manifest itself in ways like DUIs, drug use, a little bit more tenuous to draw those dots, but it can mask really shitty leadership characteristics because of that really isolated and contained environment that I've only seen exist inside of the military. And I just caution people against it. I'm very open that the best and worst leaders I ever served with were in the military. I'm sure that's your instance as well, or your case as well. The best leadership philosophy and ethos I've ever exposed to was in the military, also the worst. So it's just, it's not like, I shouldn't say so from a blanket perspective. Don't take a military leadership model. It's use with caution and understand where the boundaries are and how and when you can push people and how and when you should not push people like we did in the military.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the blessing and the curse, right? Like we're in a time when people in the military get possibly the highest level of respect. Anywhere you go, I mean, and what we'll talk about later, we're using that to our advantage in comparison to, Vietnam sides. But now, we do get pretty good benefits. We get great benefits in some cases. You go most places, thank you for your service. And so we're in a pretty good position as veterans, I think. And also, people understand it a little bit more. And I think the leadership thing comes from they just have this notion of what goes on overseas. And, okay, well, if you can make a decision over there, I just do this little small business. Who am I to counter you? But then it's also marketing, you know. I mean, you're part of the SEALs have been great at marketing and pushing the leadership, and it's been very beneficial for a lot of people getting those jobs. Like, I met a ton of professional coaches or people in business, so it is that good marketing as well that we create. But then I also think it's the pendulum swing where, you know, at some point people are taking too much of advantage of it, where now, you know, they have their Twitter accounts and they're the subject matter experts on everything. And like, I'm a veteran, so therefore I know.
Listen to what I'm saying.
For an economic policy, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if that's what you specialized. It's certainly what I specialized in as a SEAL. Yeah, foreign policy from a microeconomic level. It's no big deal. Was my specialty.
Yeah, creating small communities and micro capital.
Yeah. It's like, hey, maybe you should shut the fuck up.
I think everybody could. I think veterans are just as much social media divas as anybody else, you know? And so
they're just people.
Yeah.
And when people realize if they have a card that it may be more, I don't want to say valuable because I don't think that's the correct word for it, flashy, or maybe it's a shiny object, they will fucking play it. I don't fault them for it, but I hope they don't do it blindly as well.
Yeah. I just hope there's not like a backlash from that, you know, because I do think we are in a good spot right now. And I do think sometimes pendulums go back and forth.
If there is a backlash, it will be because the veterans took it too far. It will be 100% the community writ large's fault, not the external portion of that. It will be 100% the origin and DNA of that will come from inside of the community.
100% agree. I mean, you already see far too much drama within communities that should be good at getting along as it is.
It's gnarly. It's like a piranha tank.
I've always heard, like, I'm sure you get far too much than you even, like, care to be involved with, but...
Yeah, you got to be careful how much you pay attention to on both the positive and the negative side. Yep. You know, you can't blind yourself with only listening to the positive, and you can't blind yourself by only listening to the negative.
Yeah.
It's you got to take a managed and measured approach. So
very responsible of you.
I try. I'm generally irresponsible. Michael could let you know, but sometimes I do better than others. What were you looking at doing once you made the decision to get out?
I had no idea. I thought I was going to hit the ground running, though. You know, good degree, ranger, all that kind of stuff. First, I traveled, had some money, had some free time, so bummed around. Single. Yeah,
that also helps.
Just got out of an amazing toxic relationship, so
nice.
I got that bingo card.
Yeah.
And so, my friends happened to be planning a road trip. Ended up living in Cambodia for about a year, just kind of like...
What'd you do with your time?
Just decompressing, relaxing, and also I had the dumb, naive notions of like, oh, if I can create this business with $10 in my pocket, and then it's going to be a multi-million-dollar international conglomerate.
Very Tim Ferriss of you.
I was trying to do this like everything's a business opportunity of... What's the price point on those Thailand shirts over there?
Oh,
you know?
Fuck.
Yeah.
What book were you reading? You getting some goddamn entrepreneurial self-help going on.
You know, you gotta be hit by reality a few times. But I was over there, I met like some good people, you know, fucked with some special forces people who thought I was CIA for whatever reason over there. So, and then just kind of did some odd jobs of helping clubs promote themselves, was a DJ for a little bit, just exploring my freedom out there, you know? And Phnom Penh, I don't know, it was this place that had its own kind of dark history, obviously. And so there's just something appealing about it that had like a beautiful culture, but also this really tragic history, and the people are beautiful. I don't know, there's just something that like post-military, I think, appealed to me, and I think I just needed to be away from everything I knew and just kind of go back into that challenge, but in a different kind of more positive way.
What brought you back to the States?
Just it's like whatever I was trying to do, nothing worked out. You know, the t-shirt company didn't work out, all that kind of stuff. And then so I came back to the U.S., Again, tried a few different things.
Yeah.
Tried to start a logistics company with a buddy. So we ended up being like long-range truck drivers for a little bit.
Did you call it LERP or some shit like that?
I did not.
God, missed opportunity.
It was called like Global Logistics or Worldwide Logistics or
Bullshit. It was
something.
called probably like Rangers Will Move You or some shit like that. Rangers are us.
Rangers Lead the Way Trucking. Next time, when I'm starting it again and transporting shirts.
As if somebody hasn't already taken that.
I know. Now, because it's out there. Eventually, running out of funds, wanted to use my degree, and ended up back in finance in Tampa, Florida.
Okay. What year was that?
2015, I think.
Okay, so we still have an 8-year gap here.
2015, 16.
Yeah.
Was doing that, a big international company, decent job. But then that's kind of when my own mental health stuff started coming into play, where I was still kind of in that like travel or ranger mentality, work hard, play hard, just kind of get obliterated over the weekends. Going into that 9-to-5 situation, it was like it became much more clear that the things that I wasn't healthy, right? It was that slowdown of life where I could ignore it traveling or I could ignore it even in regiment. But when you have to show up Monday at 8 a.m. and go through that, unhealthy lifestyles start to come out. And that, for me, was just really strong anxiety, in crowded like bars or whatever, really became more prominent of hypervigilance and just nervousness, going into depression, alcohol abuse, just to kind of get past the days, and more just when I was in this job and it was, okay, I'm doing everything how I should be doing. Okay, I have the great job, being more social, doing this and this and this, and I was just completely unhappy or unfulfilled.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I saw these red flags, and so I came to the spot where, not in the same shape I was. My body was starting to I was starting to feel some of the damage of being a ranger, and just all these like factors that were just contributing to the depression and unhappiness.
What was the first step that you took to try to come and course correct that?
Try to do more like holistic things in terms of, okay, what can I solve myself? I know I can get back to a good spot. Let me go to the gym. I started cooking, preparing my own meals, eating healthier, all that kind of stuff.
How about alcohol consumption wise?
I was trying to be more moderate about it, but I was also trying to, I was single and sad, or I needed, intimate connection. And so the only way I knew how to correct that was go to the bar and try to talk to people and try to build that friend group, which, now looking back, there's plenty of other ways to do it, but that should have been the only thing. And then other things, like I was trying to meditate in the morning or journal, all this kind of stuff. Eventually I went to the VA. And, it was, I got there, I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't fortunately suicidal. I just wanted to see, hey, maybe I can get a professional's opinion on this, talk to somebody. And by that time, I finally got rated. It took the VA 2 years to even get back to me on rating.
That fast, huh?
Yeah, it was pretty nice. And then
quick turnaround for you.
When I finally got there, the whole appointment was 45 minutes in and out. I was like, this is a great service. So I went to the VA, and I told them I wasn't interested in medication. It didn't seem like the next best step. And they essentially told me that unless I, agreed to their full protocol, they could only give me a few therapy sessions. And
How fucked up is that?
Yeah.
How fucked up is it that you have to agree to a chemical protocol? Otherwise, you're going to get limited services.
Yeah, it wasn't I thought it would be easy to just go see a therapist. Like anybody, oh yeah, they always tell you to seek help. Let me talk to somebody, and I respect the woman's honesty about that, But at that point, I knew I wasn't on the medication track at that point, but also just getting 4 therapy sessions seemed kind of like a waste of time as well. And, they told me like my VA was kind of already at capacity, which was part of it. And so I just sort of left there of like, okay, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but the professionals don't really seem to know what's going on, or at least the paths that I should take, quote unquote, don't seem to be a dead end.
Did you consider at all seeking mental health outside of the VA, looking for a therapist or counselor outside of the VA protocol?
I did, but at that point, with all my wild business schemes, I really didn't have enough money to do that. So I was in this situation where...
Well, you're spending it all on booze.
Exactly. Booze and bad business ideas. And so I was in that spot where it was just like, I don't have the resources to do anything. But the booze, it also, like, I knew I was abusing it, but it was also, my depression state would be Friday night staring at the ceiling, everything gray to where I couldn't even turn on Netflix or music to pass the time or entertain. It was almost an annoyance. And I had that choice where either I could just stay awake and stare at the ceiling all night, or I could drink to the point where I passed out, get some sort of sleep, and then... rinse and repeat. Yeah. And that was also my aversion to medication where, from some people's perspective, it might be a better solution, but it was still, I'd seen the bad sides of it. I had friends that had already taken their life on medication or that fell down that path of now they need to take this, now they need to take this. And so it didn't really seem to be one better than the other, and at least I knew the alcohol side of it. I knew... the different levels of that, and I was aware of it, but I just didn't know how, regardless, I didn't know how to escape this box, right? And it didn't seem like either choice was allowing me. Both choices just it was a maintenance program of like, how can you stay in this box and be okay? Not be great, not be better, but both, for me, at least in my perspective, and this is not knocking medication, I do know saves lives and it's great for some people, but I still stand by. I don't think it was the best choice for me because it was that decision of, hey, you have PTSD or that's what you're diagnosed with, and more than likely you're just going to have to maintain that until ripe old age. And at that point too, unfortunate, heard on Rogan's podcast, Andrew Marr was on it. And he was talking about his foundation. He was a Green Beret, Warrior Angel Foundation. And he started a nonprofit, I think in 2016. And so they were working with veterans with traumatic brain injury with hormone replacement therapy. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time from this source that I heard this whole dynamic that if you're exposed to concussive blasts, even, smaller ones,
repetitively. Yeah, the impact it can have on your endocrine system.
Exactly, that can cause similar issues as PTSD, or at least augment it, right? I had to hear from this source, not from my doctors. And here I was spending the previous time in Ranger, constantly having these mortar tubes explode near my head, coming from them after 100-round fire for effects, completely punch drunk. I remember having gunners that their nose were bleeding after 120 fire for effects, and nobody once mentioned TBI to me. And so that was just sort of another point of like, okay, well, that I have a high likelihood that that's also something, and I shouldn't have to tell the doctor that that's something that should have been brought to my... So it just became this reinforcing thing of the answers were outside, not in this system.
I don't know if the doctors knew. There certainly was an element, an aspect of building the airplane as it was taking off.
Yep.
In the post 9/11 world. Breaching charges or Carl G rounds or just, throwing flashbangs in a kill house where, I'm it can't see me. I can't see it. We're probably going to be safe. Never mind the fact that it's like reflecting off of the hallway and coming at you.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody was trying to give service members TBIs, but I don't think anybody was on the lookout for it either. And I don't think it was malicious. And I don't even think it was incompetent. I just don't think they knew.
I 100% agree. I think it's all, each war has its new thing, right?
Yeah.
The problem, I think, comes in that it takes veterans and nonprofits to figure it out, where you feel like somebody else smarter than you should be like figuring this out. I shouldn't have had to hear about this from Andrew Marr on Rogan's podcast, and luckily I heard about it, right?
Andrew has more of a vested interest than the doctors do.
Yeah.
Andrew came from a community where I bet he saw the impact of that on his close personal friends. And just because somebody is smarter than you or has a, whatever acronym you want to put on a business card or a certificate on a wall, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to figure something else out if they are not seeing the visceral impact of what that is directly in front of them. It's I think the communities themselves oftentimes will be the best resource for navigating their way out of those boxes, as opposed to somebody who's looking in, who might, again, be way more book smart or have a lot more qualifications, but just doesn't have the understanding of what it's like in the box itself.
I 100% agree. I mean, my problem, because this is what I'm already facing. Fortunately, we have more traction now. But you just look at this repeating story with, even the diagnosis of PTSD, people coming from these wars, or people are still fighting to get covered for Agent Orange. And it took decades of suffering. It took people reaching Congress. You're seeing it, the same thing with burn pits. It's just this, it's not who discovers it. It's just how long it takes. Like, it just reinforces that veterans have to look out for themselves without the resources that these institutions built for veterans have, right? And it's just this repeated story of why did so many people have to suffer and die potentially before it took even the minimal effort from somebody in politics or somebody from government to pay attention, right? It keeps repeating, which is a frustrating thing.
As fucked up as this sounds, I think a lot of the time it's because they don't want to pay for it.
I agree.
They have no problem committing the human capital up front. They don't want to write the check on the back end.
I think it's also indicative of what a politician means, is the job doesn't encourage putting your neck out there. The job encourages taking the credit for the least amount of action, because then you can get reelected. You didn't risk yourself that much. There's very few politicians, in my opinion, on either side, that I would deem as courageous, because the system does not encourage that. Any courageous politician is just going to get blacklisted. Yeah. They're not going to get on the...
You have a short tenure.
Yeah. And then it's really easy to not get you reelected, right? Yeah. It's just how the system encourages that sort of thing. So anybody that really takes that as their hill to die on, they're going to die on that hill.
So how'd you get yourself out of the box?
Again, from the Rogan podcast, was at work. Work at first was good. I was getting back into finance and doing all sorts of fun modeling, and Excel spreadsheets, which is great.
I don't know if I would use the word fun in front of any of that, but you do you.
But then
floats your boat.
Then the Excel dynamic started seeping in. It just became a corporate entity. I'd work my ass off, and then it was like that concept, get home at 2 a.m. Cool, I just saved this giant company 60 cents tonight. Good for me. Let me go back to work at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And the whole point of corporations is taking out creativity. More efficient corporation is, the more automated it is, the more that you're just putting in numbers and not being creative, the more efficient it's going to be. So that really started seeping in, where at first my group was very figure stuff out, and then by our success made it very automated. And so I was just bored at work, almost ready to leave, just in that spot where I just knew I needed to make some sort of change. I didn't know what. Listening to Rogan's podcast, he had on Aubrey Marcus talking about ayahuasca. At first, just kind of, as much more of a trip report kind of thing, of chasing dragons and doing all this crazy stuff. Entertainment, but really didn't appeal to me. Had never done psychedelics. Didn't care if other people did, but, I had my vices. I didn't need...
It wasn't your cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly. And it never intrigued me from what people said about it, right? But for whatever reason, that planted its seed. And I think just more bored at work and just some part of me struggling to get out or struggling to figure something out. while things continue to get a little bit worse and worse. My brain, I think my subconscious just started convincing me that going from I'd never do that to do that in the right circumstances to I'm actively planning to do that. And again, this kind of comes full circle. I said when I studied abroad in Ecuador, so it was that kind of intrigue. I had a really good time there, and it was really enlightening, like what we're saying. And so it just sort of seemed full circle of, okay, well, let me go back. Whatever I'm doing here is not working. There's nothing worth preserving. Didn't have a solid relationship, didn't build a new friend group, work. I could easily leave, and it was like, oh, it wasn't there, right? I tried that. Let's shake it up. And so the next thing I knew, I was putting in my notice at work and just planning that trip to the ayahuasca retreat and just starting from there. I didn't really know what was going on afterwards. Fortunately, by that time, I had saved up some money. I had a little bit more flexibility than I did previously, and so had some freedom to go to, not a lot, but had some freedom to go and refigure it out. So
how'd you find the organization, or I don't even know what they call themselves, the retreat or service that you used on that first try?
So it was a center, and so this was 2016, so
okay.
Not too long ago, but even it's...
Depends on how you count. I'm counting that as like 7 years ago. It's a pretty good amount of time.
It goes by quick.
Yeah.
But the psychedelic world has changed pretty drastically since then. There really was no guides or organizations or anything, and so it's just kind of going to different websites and chat forums and figuring it out. And some, you go to the website and it'd be like, you can do ayahuasca and a dolphin tour and a hike and all this kind of stuff. And
fuck yeah.
Just give me your credit card number. Whereas that didn't appeal to me just because I wanted to...
Like all at the same time, or could you pair those up? Like dolphin and ayahuasca?
I think you could ride a dolphin on ayahuasca, whether you're there or not. Okay. I'll start that,
Yeah.
We have a lot of flexibility here.
So you find it, you get down there. How many people were there?
I think at my retreat there's 24-ish.
What kind of backgrounds?
All sorts. There's a lot of people who had heard from Rogan as well. There was people who were repeat people. There's people who fit the mold, pretty hippie.
Yeah.
Full on. There's other people who had business. There's people who were depressed. Pretty.
So broad, not real
broad.
Like one common denominator.
No, not really.
Okay.
There's some commonalities.
Yeah.
But it was right around that time that other people had heard. There's more concentration and growing of Rogan-esque crew there.
It's weird. It's almost like he has a little bit of influence.
Yeah, I don't know.
Impact.
Exactly. Yeah. Oddly enough, at that retreat, Dee Snider's wife of Twisted Sister. You know the band?
I'm not a huge jazz fan.
80s rock.
Okay.
So she was there. So wide spectrum.
Indeed.
So yeah, I was there. Didn't know anybody. Week-long retreat, middle of the jungle. At that point, felt relieved that I had left the toxic bubble and it became more clear, but also didn't really tell my family or anything, and kind of had the same notions of what the hell am I doing with this psychedelic,
And you had no idea what to expect? You kind of just was this like the next logical progression on your journey of life?
Again, kind of with the military, I felt if I was going to do this, I might as well jump into the deep water, That's ayahuasca is known as one of the stronger ones.
I've heard it's not the most pleasurable ride.
Not the most pleasurable ride, but I mean, again, in the challenge, I think our dumb brains, that kind of intrigues us. Of that's hard. Let me go check that out. And for me, I think the thing, it wasn't just let me go take this hard psychedelic. It was the fact that it had this culture, history, tradition, had been used thousands of years, and that's what allowed me to consider myself doing a psychedelic. It wasn't just taking a drug in somebody's basement. It was almost, this cultural exchange, working with this thing that had much more than just taking whatever the substance was. And so that intrigued me, and being in the jungle and being surrounded by nature, it was the whole sort of process around it.
How'd you feel at the end of that week?
It was one of the hardest things I've done, as I'm sure you've heard from other people, but I felt...
Hard in a way that when people hear military people talk about hard, they oftentimes, I think, associate with like a physical crucible. I have zero experience with psychedelics.
Yep.
From the people I have had sitting right where you are who would talk about it, they talk about it being physically difficult, but more from the perspective of like the vomiting or sweating or whatever that is. When they are talking about hard, they're talking about a psychological journey, though.
Yeah.
Not a in the world I came from, a telephone pole over your head type of journey.
For me, it was a combination. It was every single discomfort and almost feeling like psychosis possible all at once. So just in this ball of anxiety and chaos and fear that I was going to go crazy and I made a stupid choice and vomiting, every minute and just not able to sit still, sweating, mind moving in all sorts of different spots to where I was just trying to like count the seconds to get over with it. And this repeated 4 times over the week. But immediately it was apparent there was something to it. There was a depth to it. It wasn't just this happy-go-lucky psychedelic experience. But yeah, at the end of it, I felt recharged. It felt like a lot of the things I'd been carrying had been cast off. With my brain, there's some interest in terms of these being treated for TBI. It felt like the first time in a long time my brain was firing on all cylinders, not in this sort of disjointed way, which I didn't while my brain was not working, I didn't realize it, but on reflection in that immediate juxtaposition, it was like, oh shit, this is how my brain should actually work, and it's not trying to kill me anymore.
How long did that last?
The glow lasted, a few weeks, but the benefits continued on in terms of my anxiety has never been to the point that it was, and then it would devolve into that depression I kind of mentioned. Haven't returned to that since. Been in similar situations. Don't have the same hypervigilance in very crowded spots. Have to be cautious. I am like sensitive when there's a lot of crowds and all that, and it drains me. But not to the same degree. And the commonality with a lot of psychedelics that I felt myself is it almost gives you a third-person perspective to where you can see stuff coming on, to where instead of falling down into those like pits of anxiety or fear or anger, you can see it oncoming and sidestep it. And so those sort of things lasted. I mean, it helped. I had the ability to I was still traveling, so I wasn't sucked right back into distraction and
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you did. You had a little bit of flexibility. You went down there for a week. What did you do when you left?
So then I was just like, what the hell just happened to me? And I was trying to figure it out. And at that point, because it was early on, there wasn't a lot of structure. There was no preparation going into it. There's no what we call integration afterwards. There's no programmatic support. So I had to figure it out and kind of stumbled a little bit on the way, but still was progressing. So after that, trying to figure out what the next steps in my life were. So I was working these odd jobs just around South America. So either working at like hostels, I worked at a motorcycle rental shop in Colombia, and just didn't know what was the next step and trying to figure that out.
What were you doing at hostels?
They had like hostel bars, so you could be like bartenders and just intake people and all that kind of stuff. There's these jobs that
hand jobs for cash. It's not a big deal.
Exactly.
I mean, do what you got to do to survive.
I mean, it was the new me, so why not try some different things?
Okay.
The world was my oyster at that point. You never know what you're good
Pun
at
intended?
until you try.
Yeah, this is true. These are all good. I like this.
Yeah. So that can be the poster for doing ayahuasca.
All right. I don't know if that's great marketing, but we can explore this if you want to. Maybe Midjourney can help us out. We can just throw that in there. I think it's good you didn't have a path that you necessarily had to go 100% directly back towards. You could kind of... I've heard a lot of people describe their experience as, to use their words, like a rebirth.
Yeah, a lot of them can be. I don't know if for me it was necessarily a rebirth, but it was kind of a reset to, original systems kind of thing.
Did it change your relationship with alcohol?
It made me more conscientious, but it still could be and can be a struggle afterwards. But I don't have the same sort of low lows that I did. and so I didn't need it to self-medicate. But alcohol, like other substances, can be sneaky just on the casual side.
Yeah.
And so that is something, in all honesty, I do still have to be cautious of, to where when it becomes that habitual thing of, it goes from I'm just going to have some drinks with friends to that was a stressful day at work, let me just have a drink to unwind, to, it becomes associated with celebration, stress reduction, and then the next thing you know, you're having a drink every night, right?
Yeah, or if you're like Michael, you're like beer bonging, through your asshole and wearing an Indian headdress around downtown Kalispell. That's what I figure you do on Saturdays.
Yeah, well, $20 is $20.
This is what I have to deal with.
I think he's intrigued about the hand job potential of...
Yeah, he's over there Googling on the whatever hidden browser that he uses. He's like, hand jobs in hostels? Nobody's got that as a website.
Just booked it.
Yeah. All right, so you're down there. You're figuring it out. What was next?
So I moved to Columbia. I was working at a motorcycle rental shop, and it was around that time I was starting to open up to friends that were still in, and like, hey, I just did this. And I thought everybody was just going to be like, that's fucking crazy. What did you do?
I feel like you got the opposite response.
I got that response, but I also got, hey, man, if it works, it works, right?
Yeah.
Like, that does sound crazy, but it really made sense, because I think, people in the service and special operations, it's one of those things of you use the tools on the ground, right? Like, you can train or prepare as much, but at the end of the day, you complete the mission, and sometimes you have to, figure it out on the fly, right?
Yeah.
And I think most people, even at that time, it was already pretty well apparent that a lot of guys we know are taking their own lives or on that active path. It was no secret, and it was no secret that like there was being solutions or anything else. And so I was a little bit surprised, but it just kind of reinforced this sort of notion of, hey, I just stumbled onto something that a lot of people weren't really talking about in the military. I had, like I said, didn't really have any support going into it, and it became kind of this repetitive sort of thing of, hey, you got to do something about that, right? And then it was that question of like, okay, well, because of my background in finance business, maybe I have the potential to actually make something of that. And it kind of grabbed me kicking and screaming, because, again, I still had that notion of maybe I can make this $1 million T-shirt company with trucking. And the last thing I want to do is start a nonprofit. But it just kind of came to that moment of like, hey, you stumble on this, it can help people, you have the ability to do it. Oh, shit. Let me figure out how to make a nonprofit. So I was in the middle of nowhere, Columbia, this internet cafe shop, just, Googling LegalZoom, how the hell do you make a nonprofit, and how do you make a website? And little by little kind of created that and figured out what it was and what we were going to be doing. And so this was early 2017, and April 1st, just kind of put it out there and started Heroic Hearts Project, and with the idea to educate veterans about ayahuasca and, later other psychedelics, but then connect them to retreats that were vetted or that I trusted. So if they wanted to do the ayahuasca dolphin rides, I had the connection, or if they wanted to...
I don't think anybody should do an ayahuasca dolphin ride. For clarity, it might look good on a brochure, but that's like one you should sell up front but then not deliver on in the back end.
Just say it's all in your mind, and then...
Yeah. Dolphins can get very sexual with humans.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to... I wouldn't want to go into those realms.
They got a massive hog.
Yeah.
It's... Michael would be busy. Full range of motion of his shoulder, if you know what I mean.
This podcast is taking
jaw
interesting
workout.
turns.
We never know where it's going to go. We never know where it's going to go. But it usually terminates in Michael giving somebody a hand job. Metaphorically, not actually physically. That doesn't occur.
All in your mind. Again.
Yeah. Okay, so you start Heroic Hearts. What was the initial feedback?
With the veterans, there's some that were open to it. There wasn't a lot of discussion around it. To my knowledge, there really wasn't another organization out there. And so when I was like going to, first like ranger groups and all this kind of stuff, and then others, it was kind of crickets. It was some people were interested or some people heard of it, but there wasn't a huge feedback. And then when I was trying to reach out, cold call, various veteran nonprofits, that was more of the "you're doing what?
Yeah.
No, don't call me again" kind of thing.
So you're saying this is in 2017 you launched it?
Yeah.
I honestly don't think I heard about psychedelic treatment for veterans until like the 2020s. It has been recent.
Yeah.
Marcus and Amber Capone came on with vets, and he talked about Marcus's experience specifically. I think that was the first very focused conversation I had about it, and that was not that long ago.
Yeah.
So you were definitely early in my complete lack of knowledge about it, for sure.
Yeah, I think like the general timeline, we were in 2017. Vets started, I think, 2019. There's a clinic that they originally went to, Mission Within. That was like 2017, 2018. So, I mean, still kind of happened around the same time, serendipitously, but again, that like when I did the research and was trying to find veteran groups, there really wasn't anything, and so it was just sort of that need of the market. But so even though the feedback was out there, kind of the universe took it to where it was. So nonstop uphill battle, but within a month, moved to Medellin, really liked the city, and serendipitously met, the first two board members. One was randomly at a bar. He had an ayahuasca shirt, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I'm doing this." And
The fuck does an ayahuasca shirt look like?
well, he worked for something called the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, and so it's it's a legal defense fund for people who get arrested for whatever,
What a weird T-shirt.
It's a weird world. But then the hostel that I was staying at, no blowjobs or hand jobs there. Sorry.
Hostels and handies is, I think, what we should call it.
But he was a Marine. He did really well in like crypto and all this other kind of stuff. Owned this building there. He was a Marine. He had tried ayahuasca. Connected with him. He helped fund the first group. So within a month, we were able to send the first group of 5 veterans, mostly Rangers, because that was my group, to Peru, which was pretty great.
And is this still early on? Because the people I've talked to recently, there is a full-on regimen and protocol before and after. So it's not, hey, carve a week out of your schedule, go down there and come back a changed person. It's like, this is very thoughtful.
Yep.
It's very focused. What do they call it? A dieta or a diet leading up to it? From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that's to basically enhance whatever it is that you're going to take. It'll enhance what you're going to get out of that, so it's not fighting other bullshit in your body.
Yep.
But then a lot of the work is actually after as well. So it's not just like, hey, 5 days to the Scientology, 5 days to total freedom. There's a lot on the front and back end.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a evolving process, right? So with this first group, I hopped on calls with them and like, hey, this is what... So very basic early preparation. This is what I went through. This is what to expect. This is where you're going. They go there. Already had a relationship with this retreat. So like, hey, you guys can trust this. And then afterwards talked about like, hey, I hope you had a good time. But also, somewhat naive in the early spot of kind of thinking that it was everybody was going to get the same experience.
Yeah.
More often than not, when it's prepared and done right, everybody or the majority of people do get a positive in terms of life benefit experience, but not all of it's going to look the same. Some people are going to come out of there and be like, oh, amazing, like I saw all this kind of stuff. Other people are going to have a much harder time, and it's going to take them time to figure out what that means in their life or make major changes. When we're in trauma states, we're very good at digging ourselves deeper and deeper, and it can take some time to get out of that, even if you recognize it. So it was just sort of this learning process of, okay, I sent this group, what are the reactions? So a lot of them, and to this day, had completely life transformations. One guy reconnected with his dad. Another guy has been off to the races. One guy fell kind of back into his trauma. Still, he reports that he's better off, but a lot of the trauma stuff came back in.
I was gonna ask you, how sticky, and maybe that's a non-precise term, but I can't think of a better one. How sticky are the impacts or benefits? Because I know a good amount of people now at this point, and it seems like I'm going to say there's 3 categories. One, they go and come back almost as something unrecognizable. And I don't mean physically. I mean, it's a life shattering in a positive way that I don't have the vocabulary to describe. The second category would be people who come back and espouse those things, and then in a certain period of time, and it's hard to say depending on the person, they're right back doing the same shit.
Yeah.
And then the much smaller category is they go and it has no impact at all.
Yeah.
I guess those would be the three categories. So how sticky, anecdotally, obviously just in your own experience through Heroic Hearts, how sticky have you found it to be?
So I agree with those categories, but I'd add one more. And it tends to be that like a bell curve, like you're saying. Like on the one side, there's some people that just do it. They're off to the races.
Yeah.
It just unloads the burdens they're carrying.
It's like a nuclear mushroom cloud, and they walk away from it like, holy shit, who are you?
Never look back, right?
Yeah.
There's, I think the vast majority, they're in the major part of the bell curve. And some will espouse it, but they'll go back to their stuff. But a lot that I see in my program will still make benefits, even if it's slight. And at the very least, they'll understand that, you know, with a lot of veterans right now, too, like lack of hope is a big problem because they go to the VA, take all these medications. If it still doesn't work, then they're just like, well, shit, like, what else do I have?
I'd say societally, lack of hope is an issue.
Yeah. But with this, even if they just feel happiness, feel hope or whatever, it does show them that's possible, right? But so the vast majority that I see go through it, and they might need eventually to go back to, or they might go back more to psychedelic in the future, and then continue to learn the lessons. Ideally, they're not going back to do the same exact thing. That's what we try to train against. Like if you're just doing it over and over again and you're following the same things, that's where it's a choice dynamic, or it's how you frame your life. Because more often than not, this shows you it's a tool of what problems you're making, what things you're putting yourself into that reinforces trauma or get you back into those patterns, right? It's similar to addiction. Like if you have a drug problem, alcohol problem, and you go right back to the same group of party friends, or you're only hanging out at the bar, obviously that same kind of stuff. And so ideally what we want to train people is if they do go back to a psychedelic, give it time. Like don't just go back, regimented every month, but also understand why you're going. Like if you're going back for the same reasons, then that's probably something on you, and not to victim blame or anything, but like look at yourself of why you keep falling back into the patterns before you're relying on the psychedelic. A lot of people I see, they go back and it's either to go in deeper or figure stuff out, or, sometimes life sucks and you just might need that kind of reset that these can provide. And that is the missing piece too, though, which we're trying to work on, is I think we're just dealing with a system without the necessary infrastructure support. We were talking about your coffee shop, of how important community is. Community systems have really dissolved, especially in the veteran community. Most places, a lot of people don't go to the VFW or American Legion that much because it's antiquated in a lot of ways, right? And so veterans are coming from these groups, these camaraderies, these brotherhoods or sisterhoods, and then they're going into isolation. They go to this amazing experience, but then they go right back to isolation. There's nobody to hold them accountable. There's nobody to support them. There's no avenues for them to get back into the economy or anything like that. And so, I think there's this opportunity here. It's not going to be this magic pill that you just take ayahuasca and you're going to be, a Fortune 500 company founder.
T-shirts, of course.
T-shirts. But it does provide this opportunity to where if you have the ability and you have the infrastructure to make those positive changes in your life, then you can. But we're building this new thing, this infrastructure outside of it without the necessary support because we don't have the $80 billion of the VA. So I do think there is this thing that we really need to focus on, and that is a question mark. But we are seeing a huge potential to make those positive changes. And at the very least, this group of people have at least more hope that they can get to that level, which I think is a big shift and positive benefit of what we're experiencing now.
You think you'll ever get to a place where it's legal in the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's already in Oregon. You can go to get a clinical or go in a clinical model and get psilocybin at this point. MDMA is within a year of being prescribable. It's about to pass FDA. So it had significant numbers for PTSD, for treating PTSD. That's sort of been the biggest movement. And so they're trying to get that through the VA. And then some of the other ones like ayahuasca, it's probably a long time away just because of the name. It's going to freak people out, and it's a little bit trickier. Ibogaine, I think so. I think it'll be hard on the PTSD side because it has more of a risk potential. But it has...
What's the risk?
Because Ibogaine has a specific... it's extra hard on the heart, and so
it's like a cardiorespiratory demand.
Yeah. So if people have specific cardiovascular issues, but originally Ibogaine has been used with like addiction too. So you're dealing with some of the already pretty unhealthy population. So there has been some people who have died from that, but they tend to be on the severe spectrum of opioid addiction. Yeah. But Ibogaine has been shown to be specifically effective for opioid addiction because it takes away withdrawal symptoms, and for a lot of people it makes them not crave opioids for at least a period of time, that if they are going to make changes, they have that window. So potentially for that, just in terms of the comparison of the efficacy for addiction versus what we have now, which is abysmal in terms of addiction, that might have a potential. But again, if you go to an Ibogaine retreat for PTSD, you're going to have an EKG to see your heart. You're going to be hooked up to EKG machines. You're going to have an IV port because the experiences can last 24 hours, sometimes longer.
Fuck.
And so you're in it, and your heart, it's not like a passive sort of thing. And so some of these more obscure ones, I think, are going to have a hard time. But you can do a lot with MDMA just given the results. It's really effective in therapy. And something like psilocybin, at this point, there's so many people with trauma and that are on the edge that if we can get something that at least takes them a few steps away from the edge, that gives us a lot more time and a lot more options to work with. So even just giving us the tools of MDMA and psilocybin, and there's, some ketamine clinics that you can kind of work with too, that's already going to change mental health perspectives night and day.
I'm glad to see that stuff moving forward. My concern is, in what I have experienced in my own social circle to a degree, are individuals who it becomes, and this is me speaking for them, not things what they have said, but just my personal thoughts, is that it becomes more about the journey through psychedelics than the actual work itself. Yep. And they come back and act like they're fucking enlightened. Like call me Amakanda because I am a shaman. I was like, shut the fuck up, Bob. You clean pools in Temecula. Shut the fuck up. Now, and I'm not saying that these experiences can't be completely life-changing, but it's just this... The community of people we come from are like, there's first gear and fifth gear, and they oftentimes find a hard time finding second, third, and fourth. If anybody's going to fuck this up, it's the exact same community of the people who need it the most. Because they're the backyard. I know people literally who have gone to Temecula to an Airbnb that was rented out by some dude who is a fucking shaman, and it's like they're administering this type of stuff in a setting that I'm going to say is probably far less controlled. Yeah. And that is how people are going to fuck. They're going to fuck this all up. And that's what concerns me the most.
Yeah, I mean, that is a big concern. And for anybody watching, we always say, like, I'm out here advocating for psychedelics. That does not mean you're having issues, go just randomly take psychedelics, right?
Walk out into the forest and eat a fistful of mushrooms. Like, not a good idea.
If you have experience, then, go do your thing, right? Do what you need. I'm not opposed to... But if you're trying to deal with trauma and you're just looking for that quick fix, this is not it. We do work with a lot of people that go to these basement sort of ceremonies, and they come to us, and they're really, we have to work with them a lot because it was not a good situation. It really opened them up, and it really exposed a lot of things that they were working with, but didn't give them that container of support to actually work with it, which can put them in a not a great spot afterwards. So these are things to be treated with respect, and they are things to be done in the correct manner. And that's where we're trying to really advocate for with the program, like you mentioned, where we do now 4 to 6 weeks of preparation with one-on-one counseling, group counseling, diet, breathwork, mindfulness, very specific retreat centers and protocols there, and then a lot of aftercare, which can always use improvement, whatever program's out there, because there's so many different tools, and at the end of the day, we really need veterans to help veterans. But if it's done outside of that sort of regiment, then it can be a little bit worrying.
Yeah, I worry that people think that the ingestion of whatever it is, and I don't, as long as you are a consenting adult, I don't care how people live their lives. I have no negative judgment of people who choose to drink or not drink.
Yeah.
If you want to fucking snort cocaine off some dude's shaft, go ahead. Why that analogy? I'm not sure. If you want to do psychedelics, go do psychedelics. But if you think that psychedelics, absent any other work, is going to be this magical solution, that's where I think the issue lies. And I guess that's the issue, if I were to dial down to it even more and parse it out, that I have with people who go and come back, and it's like they feel like they are enlightened and a level of a being above everybody else because of fill in the blank, and they're not doing the work on the front end. They're not doing the work on the back end. I know people who have gone like 20 times.
Yep.
Which again, I like. If you like the ride, go fuck. I don't care. Go do the ride, but don't come back and try to pitch me this shit that you're ultra enlightened and you have a better understanding of the universe because you spend your time. Like some of the people I know who have done that, their fucking life is a mess.
Yeah.
But they want to pretend as if they have found the key to enlightenment.
That is a problem. I mean, it's the same thing with anything else. Everybody's always looking for self-validation and what makes them unique, and you give them this little window, and then that's what they become. And especially, I think now in the social media days, you know, everybody's trying to find that like that edge to do it. And so, I mean, you know, psychedelics often get associated with ego death because there's this dynamic where you go in and kind of lose your sense of self, and people kind of equate that to breaking through, which is not necessarily the case. But it also has an ego enhancement kind of side where you go through this because it does feel like you're connected to the source or this profound enlightenment or God or what have you, and you come back and it does make you feel like your life has changed, you know. And I think in a lot of ways it can be because it is expanding perceptions. It's putting your perceptions in a different sort of plane of what you're taking in. But at the end of the day, you're still the same dude that you were beforehand. You know, it doesn't make you more qualified to give advice, or doesn't make you more qualified to do anything.
You should put that in the flyer too.
but I do see it. I do see it as well. And it's, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's with all this kind of stuff is, you know, help yourself first. Like if you're jumping ahead of how can I be a guru and you're still messed up, there's inherent flaws. Help yourself first. Keep it small circles, and with everything, like, be humble. Right? If I ever see an ego on any of this kind of stuff, you know that person hasn't done the work. Right?
Well, and that's the thing. Like, it's work. I mean, everything I have in my life that I consider valuable is not something that was gifted to me. I mean, I'm sure I could think of things like physical things that would be gifted, but like an accomplishment, I guess, you know, something that is that you can achieve but is less tangible than something could like slide across the table. That shit comes with effort. It comes with time. And yeah, you could look at I mean, I guess as far as things that most people will not accomplish, the day that you graduate buds, which is so fucking stupid. Like that, you ring a bell it's symbolic. You could look at that ringing of the bell and be like, that's it. And you could lose everything that happened before that and the years of work that happened after that if you only focus on that bell. It's just so much work. And I want people to live their most fulfilled life. I truly do. And I don't know, it's, you know, to me, I'm sure you're in the same boat too, especially in the world that you're working in, because you're probably, speaking for you here a little bit, and of course correct me, you're probably encountering some people who are fucking on their one toe's already over the ledge because they just don't know what else to do.
Yep.
I don't understand why so many veterans make the choice to kill themselves. Fuck fuck. If it would stop it, I would say like on your exit from the military, everybody should need to go and go do fill in the blank. But it's not the fill in the blank. It's the work. It's just how that gets lost. That I think is the risk, that it will in and of itself get lost. And I just hope that people don't forget that the work on the front and back end is actually what makes the difference. From my understanding, whatever that thing you may ingest in between, it can be a tool that can help you cross that bridge, but you better build the bridge first.
Yep.
Because, again, if you're a fucking pool cleaner and you change nothing about your life and you go get enlightened and come back and everything is still the same, why would you expect anything to be different?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have – it's part of almost a selection, too, of we do that long preparation because it weeds out the people who just want to, like – the easy answer, because if they don't show up and they don't go to their calls and all that kind of stuff, then we drop them, right? If they don't follow the diet, then that's room for dropping. But it also prepares them and allows us to see at the experience, it itself is tough, right? Like, these are hard experiences, and so we don't want somebody to go there that's just going to give it like half-assed kind of thing. We want people who actually want to help themselves. So it's kind of the dynamic of the psychedelic itself, but these people are fighting for their own side. There's this, and them being in the community, there's all these enhancers of the actual experience where they feel connected again. They're investing in their own selves. They feel confidence in themselves. They touch hope and peace and self-love for the first time, oftentimes in a long time. So they see what is possible, and then they still have that community afterwards that they can take it. But with the heavy encouragement of like this is going to take work. Like this is the next part is the hard part, right? Like you do have to make the choices. You do have to commit to this. So I agree, and I think with a lot of people, I think part of the reason it can help that's different from just having a psychedelic experience is it does seem to help sort of shake things up, that we get so indoctrinated in that military mindset and being a part of that unit, and people are almost halfway in, halfway out, where they're still kind of super military with their families, and there's not a lot that can get them and shake that free, where this stuff does seem to kind of,
reorient your perspective,
laundromat that, and like give them sort of this fresh perspective on things and mix things up to where if they do take that and they do the work afterwards, that they can really use it to its benefit. But it is that encouragement right now, and that's why it does take, and I appreciate the opportunity for this, because it does take these messages to get that out there, because we always see this when people go through it, and this is great. I mean, it's a good sign of veterans. The first thing they want to do is like, I want to shout this from the rooftops, I want to help everybody, and we always have to say like, calm this down. First, help yourself. Don't push other people to do this, because if you're pushing it, then they're doing it for you. They need to come to us first, because that indicates that they're willing to do it, right? That indicates that they're willing to go through it. If somebody else pushes them, we've seen far worse results, because it's not their decision. They're kind of doing that out of a little bit of guilt or whatever, and so that is the message that needs to be put out there, that this is not magic. It can be very effective. We're seeing that backed up by science and a lot of the research, but there's a lot more to it. And that's also the hard part, because mental health is not built for that. Our current mental health systems are very medicated model, prescription model, where you're reliant on the substance and not relying on the in-person interaction, or, you don't go to the VA and they're like, hey, you should, how's your diet? Some might ask that, but I didn't get that experience. They're not asking how the rest of your life is going.
What's the most cutting edge shit going on right now in the heroic hearts world that you're seeing in the psychedelic world?
There's a lot of research going on. We're doing sort of combinations, transcranial magnetic stimulation in addition. So it's adding different modalities to the psychedelics. I mean, it's not, I guess cutting edge in some sort of sense. I mean, for me, the biggest thing I'm excited for is we're finally getting statewide legislations where we can bring this domestically. And that's really what we're trying to do, to spend a lot of our time and energy in places like Oregon right now, in the future Colorado, where, right now ourselves and vets, we have to send people to another country to get life-saving care.
Yeah, it reduces the burden to entry and participation for sure.
Right. And also just the sheer size of the people needing some sort of help. It's impossible to send, tens of thousands of people to Mexico or Peru or what have you. It's just not a scalable model. And like I said, that also misses a factor that if you have people from all over the U.S., when they go back home, they still might be on their group chats and stuff like that, but they don't have that localized support community. And so for me, the most exciting thing, and this kind of goes into what we were talking about before, is you have to understand what the VA is. The VA is the biggest healthcare provider potentially in the world. It's not an innovative resource. It's not going to be the thing that discovers the next war's issue. That is generally going to fall on nonprofits and veterans who have vested interest. And so I think veterans need to be more prepared about that reality and work together better on a community basis where they are supporting it, so we don't have to repeat, or if we do repeat the cycle, there's a little bit more support. And that can start with psychedelics, where if we do this domestically and rebuild these community structures that I think have disintegrated in a lot of places, and allow people to tap into it, but more based around mental health, where they might have access affordably to a psychedelic experience if they need that. But then it's more than that. They can check in. They have people doing jiu-jitsu or people doing breath work or cold plunges. They have that community resource more in ways if they want to help themselves. They have people who have that localized experience, expertise, and they can be held accountable. They can support it. They can also get, some sort of employment, being peer support coaches or that. So we're really trying to build these self-sustaining ecosystems where people can feed into it, people can take from it, and we don't have to put a lot of time investment. They just build themselves. And just based off of the history of psychedelics, it lends itself to this communal side of things, kind of these more traditional ceremonial sides that I kind of mentioned before. So I think that is the huge potential. Whether somebody wants to tap into the psychedelic or not, they are coming to the U.S., and so we need to figure out what our culture, what our dynamic around it, and also the safety structures around it, so we're not just feeding into this self-medicating model. And so that's one of our biggest focuses going forward.
Do you think it'll ever get to a place where the VA actually might fund and support something like this?
They will more than likely fund MDMA.
Really?
Yeah.
Why MDMA versus some of the other options that are available?
MDMA, just because it's closest to being FDA approved. And there's already the Bronx VA, the Portland VA that are already doing expanded access. So it hasn't passed the FDA yet, but there's certain expanded access where veterans in the Bronx VA can go there and get MDMA treatment right now.
I've read some great stuff about MDMA-assisted therapy.
Exactly. That's it. It's not just not just going to a rave and taking MDMA. As therapeutic as that can be.
Just spinning chem lights.
But also MDMA, so you have the hallucinogens like psilocybin and ayahuasca, and ibogaine is a little bit different, but still similar in that regard. MDMA is closer to traditional talk therapy than something like psilocybin mushrooms.
Interesting.
Because you take it and it's called an empathogen, so it opens up your heart, builds trust, and so you're more likely to be able to dive deep and trust your therapist. And so it still really requires a therapist to do talk therapy with you. They just have this tool that allows you to be a little bit more open and vulnerable and also be able to access different parts of your brain. So
that's the key. What you just said is the key. It's a fucking tool.
Yeah.
That, again, if you build a shit bridge and you try to drive a car across it, it's going to crumble. But if you make the time to build this foundation and you have somebody there who's an expert in that and you can use that tool, fuck, man, I hope it can make a difference. So
MDMA I see coming. I think psilocybin too, but that's going to be a much trickier sort of thing. Just because it's in my opinion, a hallucinogen in the VA is kind of doesn't blend with the culture that much of the.
They might slightly be at odds with one another.
Exactly. And also, I don't know many veterans who would really want to do a hallucinogenic journey in an old VA building.
So I have no experience with mushrooms, but what I have heard is, depending on the dosage, though, it doesn't actually have to be hallucinogenic. Or I guess the type of mushroom. I've heard people say it can be much more opening more along the lines of MDMA, which also no experience with, but more of like a pathway into the comfort level to open up.
Lower doses for sure. I mean, and then we're all at the beginning of the research and understanding. You know, there's some in the camp that the hallucinogenic properties help because it allows sort of the self-healer where it takes down certain walls and something called the default mode network, allows trauma to come up and you process it in almost this weird dreamlike state where it's not necessarily the thing you're processing, but you're processing the emotion, right? Like it's if you have like an anxious dream, the dream doesn't represent what you're anxious about, but you're still experiencing that. So there's a lot of people in the camp, myself included, that there's that value there, and that also empowers you and also trains you to better handle future trauma because you're relying on yourself as opposed to a medication or somebody else. But there is that dynamic with psilocybin that you can take a certain dosage, and it just kind of opens you up a little bit. The same thing with all of them. We're still very early, and there's debate. You know, like the DEA is funding non-psychedelic psychedelics for that reason, because there is...
The fuck is a non-psychedelic psychedelic?
Because there does seem to be other benefits, right? There does seem to be antidepressive effects, possibly anti-inflammatory effects, which is good for TBI, a few other things. So they're trying to take advantage of those other benefits without going into the psychedelic mode, because modern and Western medicine really hate the uncontrollable. The fact that you're going on this journey and the doctor has no say in it or can't control it, like that's completely counter to the scientific method. And
humans are such idiots.
Yeah.
We try to control everything.
Yeah.
It's like maybe sometimes just strap in.
Yeah.
Take the fucking rocket ship for a ride.
I mean, I'm all at it. That's the name of my job.
So, given your experience in special operations, and this is obviously just your personal opinion, do you think that it should be required upon the end of a career? Let's just talk in the special operations world because we have experience in that world, and I can speak almost nothing at all on the conventional military. Do you think it should be required upon your exit?
No, I think anything that's required is just going to fuck more people up.
That's fair.
I think it should be. I think there should be easier avenues to allow for it with proper education of what it's about, and clear channels for that. But yeah, I think for those that want it, that get out, because we do. I mean, there's some benefit for some people to have a little bit of exposure into the civilian world, so they have some sort of understanding where the friction lies and maybe utilize it. But also, if it's a little bit more open access, it's not like you don't have to. It's not your only chance, right?
Yeah.
From my perspective, especially for guys that are in for a long time, you're so geared into that world that I do think it could be a big benefit of. We have this whole indoctrination going into SEAL or Ranger, right? That's what they're called. And being a part of this unit and operating in a completely different thing that's different from how you operate in civilian world in a lot of ways. And so having some sort of experience that can help that transition, I think can be very beneficial for a lot of people. At least give them a good head start to where they're not this like disgruntled like vet of, oh, I hate these people in college. I hate these people at the, which is still going to happen, but at least you're, maybe shedding some of the trauma or shedding some of the other things there. So yeah, I mean, I think if there is that program, I doubt that's going to be the VA's sort of thing. But that's why there's always parallel systems. That's why there's always nonprofits and VSOs and
NGOs, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
What's the biggest hurdle that Heroic Hearts faces?
Still, I think less so stigma. It's starting to get pretty well known in the veteran community. I think it's just always funding. There's a lot of infrastructure to do it right, and we're the more support we can provide a person, the more ground level support, the better. But you constantly have to, as a nonprofit, convince people and then have them give you your money. Because right now it's still pretty limited in terms of government funding. It's starting to open up, but that's going to be more clinical trials, like big level stuff. Corporate funding is still pretty inexistent, given, again, the stigma. It's not like Coca-Cola is going to be, gung-ho on psychedelics anytime soon. So it's really is that sort of challenge of any nonprofit, ourselves in psychedelics or people doing burn pits. It's convincing people to give a shit enough and bring their money there that they help you do the job that should be done by the government or the VA.
What do you guys do with the funds you receive?
So it's the operations, that whole program, and sending them to these various retreats in different countries. So ayahuasca, psilocybin, ibogaine.
Is it no cost to the person that's going?
We do sliding scale. We like them to have skin in the game.
Yeah. I actually think it's a really good idea.
It actually does make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, I bet it does.
They have some sort of investment in it and makes them more serious about it.
Yeah.
So we do that. We do education of just reaching out and doing some presentations and all that. Research. So we're doing like a psilocybin head trauma study. We're working with the University of Texas to do ayahuasca, psilocybin, all that kind of stuff. And then some advocacy. So some of the states that have changed it so we can actually bring access to this locally and then also put pressure on the federal government. So those are kind of the main buckets. The vast majority go to the actual operations because we have, thousands of people reach out to us and we're trying to help out as many people as possible from that.
Do you sell those shirts you're wearing?
I do.
I was going to say, we could tie in these fucking fantastic business ideas you've had. So we could do shirts where you could use the proceeds from that to fund this.
I'm all about it.
I'm assuming you already do it. Where can people find that shirt?
On our website, heroicheartsproject.org, and then there's a merch tab.
Okay.
So this shirt's in collaboration with American Yogi, so another veteran that does yoga retreats for various veterans.
Yoga retreats. I'm not down with that shit. That shit's dangerous.
I already signed you up.
No, I'm not. Well, you can sign me up all you want to. I'm not going to be like, yeah, I'll meet you guys there.
Do you have any interest? Do you think you'll ever do a psychedelic, or it's just not your thing?
I don't know. Listening to what you just said about, thousands of people reaching out to you, I by no means feel like I am unchanged by my experience in the military. I am sure that there was damage that was done along the way, but I also think it made me a better version of myself. I would feel so selfish taking a slot from one of the thousands of people that reach out to you. I would not be able to stomach the idea of that.
Right.
I have nothing but questions about psychedelics. My relationship with alcohol has drifted in and around over time. Like the community I came from, holy fuck.
Yep.
When I first got in pre-9/11, it's like you weren't making chief until you had to your third DUI. Now it's the fastest way out of the military is an alcohol-related incident. But the culture of drinking and drinking heavily was definitely a part of the community. And I don't say that with any judgment. I think it should be really people should understand the consequences of that because I dove into the bucket both feet. And it's still there. I've had times in my life where I drink heavily, and I've had times in my life where I don't even drink at all. Like I don't have it doesn't have its hooks in me. So it's not I've been fucking blackout drunk before. It's not a matter of I'm not worried about an altered mental state because kind of alcohol is kind of that in and of itself, right? It changes your lens and perspective. I just don't know what I would get out of it, I guess. And that's a shitty answer to your question or not complete answer to your question, but I don't know how to accurately describe it.
Yep.
Not against it by any stretch. I'm not sure what I would get out of it.
Fair enough. I mean,
and I know there are people who are fucking hurting and using that as their last resort.
Yep.
Who the fuck am I to step in front of that?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the goal of hopefully it gets that spot to where you don't feel like that. And if you do want to, explore it, then you have a little bit more ability. I will say quickly though, I mean, I don't think this applies to you, but we do get, especially a lot of special operators where we get hey, I don't think I deserve this, or I don't want to cut the line or anything like that. And oftentimes a lot of those people are the ones that need it just as much because there's a lot of people in the military that are so used to carrying everybody else's burdens. And even if they're exhausted, it's what's one more? Yeah. And when they go there, you can just see it all come off. And, it's often the in my community anyway, of what my experience is, the ones that you least expect that are hurting the most because they seem so good at carrying it. So, I mean, it's for everybody, but for anybody listening, I wouldn't shy them away of that. You know, we do operate at a good capacity, and we are increasing. So I don't want to give people the sense that, like, oh, this is hopeless with all this kind of stuff. There's always spots that open up. And I also don't want people to not go because of, you know, there are, I think we all deserve a little bit of selfishness when it's for our own good, you know?
Yeah, I think that's fair. What do you want to close it out with, man? We've been at this for, over 2 hours.
You know, for people listening and they want to know more, they can always reach out to our website. Like I said, it's a nonprofit, so anybody who also wants to support, you know, we're happy to take your money and donations. Or
I'm assuming they can donate through the same portal.
Yeah, heroicheartsproject.org. And like I said, this is coming locally. This is coming at some point. So for those that are, you know, having a hard time, this is one of the best. There's not a best time, but at least there's a light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of people that are suffering. And I don't know when this is coming out, but we're also doing a fundraiser show at Rogan's new comedy club, The Mothership in Austin.
Sweet.
July 11th. So we got some like good comedians like Ron White and Brian Simpson.
It will not be out by July 11th.
Well, then anybody who y'all missed it, and it was amazing.
Yeah, it was. I've heard it was the best comedy show ever.
Sold out. Joe Rogan gave up comedy after that. It was, you know,
he's funny as fuck.
Yeah,
I'm assuming he'll be there supporting you guys.
I hope so.
Yeah.
He's a busy man.
I've heard.
Yeah.
There's always time.
There's always time
until there's not.
Exactly.
Right on. Yeah, what else? What else do you want to close out with, man?
That's all I got. I don't know.
When are you out of Montana?
We leave tomorrow, so I'm thinking about doing my dad's here.
Okay.
So that's kind of been the cool thing of, I was in Denver, there's this big, crazy psychedelic conference, and since I was out west, I kind of matched it up with coming here. My dad and I used to do fishing trips in Montana, so this has been like an amazing like blast from the past where, you know, it's been years since we did it. We just did some fly fishing on the Madison and Yellowstone, and so tomorrow we're probably just going to drive around the Glacier National Park. So it's been kind of a cool, like, you know, I get busy with what I'm doing and lose sight of the family time. So that on that side, I appreciate you inviting me out here.
Yeah. Are you guys flying out of Kalispell?
Flying out of Bozeman.
Tomorrow you fly to Bozeman?
No. Thursday. So
okay.
Tomorrow
you have time.
Yeah.
Definitely hit up Glacier.
Okay.
The locals will probably hate me, but yeah, there's millions of people who come up here and see it. Personally, I think it's better in Yellowstone.
Yeah.
People are out there just clutching their pearls. It's like, fuck off. Calm down. I'm just saying my own personal opinion.
Do you recommend just drive around it? Or because I feel like you need like bear spray if you're doing the hikes.
Yeah, I mean, don't take the bear spray on the airplane with you. Apparently that's an issue in Montana and other places that have bears.
I'll just have my bag of ayahuasca and bear spray and see what they take.
Well, yeah. They might take both. Or neither. Who fucking knows? Depends on who's manning the checkpoint at that point. You know what I mean? Sliding scale of humanity and capability. I would say you wouldn't be upset with either. Walking around in there's a bunch of awesome lakes. There's a bunch of great trails. There's also the Going to the Sun Road. I don't think you'd be let down by either option. So I think you have a win-win in front of you.
Yeah. Amazing.
Cool. Well, let's get you back to your dad.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.